Good morning. Welcome to day 3 of the hearing. Are there any housekeeping issues claimants wants to address?
No housekeeping issues. Good morning. Just wanted to introduce a new face at the table, Mr. Scott Statham, who is the Vice President and Deputy General Counsel of Freeport-McMoRan.
Good morning.
Welcome.
Pleasure to meet you.
Good morning. Anything from respondent side?
No, Madam President, no housekeeping. Thank you.
Perfect. Then we will continue with the cross-examination of Mr. Davenport.
Okay.
Thanks very much. Good morning, Mr. Davenport.
Good morning.
So, when we left off yesterday, I think we made it to 1987.
Oh, okay.
I'm going to ask that we both, and because I'm guilty of this as well, try to keep ourselves as concise and focused as possible, both in the questions and the answers.
And I was
there's
also
a lot to talk about. I know you love this project.
And I was also reminded by the interpreters if I could slow down, because
Right.
it was hard
That
for
too.
them to. And I will try, and please interrupt me if I'm talking too fast.
Okay. I am also guilty of talking too fast, so my apologies in advance for that. But also, if we can just really try to keep the answers focused on the specific questions, and if there's a need to add more detail, we can talk about whether that's an appropriate time to do so. But we'll just be able to move faster and keep to our allotted time as much as possible. So. All right, so 1987 is when you begin working for Phelps Dodge, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And your positions for the next 13 years or so until April of 2000 are in Arizona, is that right?
Arizona and New Mexico.
Okay. So you join SMCV in April of 2000 as General Manager of Operations.
Correct.
And I think we established in February that was sort of a position that had been created in the wake of Phelps Dodge's acquisition of Cypress as part of a process of sort of integrating the two companies. So you had a president of the company who was already in place from Cypress, and you were going to go there as general manager, kind of the number 2 position to sort of bring the cultures together. Is that right?
Yes, they did. But there's 9 different mines, and they tried to do that at all the different mines.
Right. So it wasn't just this.
It wasn't just Cerro
Company.
Verde, it was all of them.
Right. But shortly after you arrived, the president actually chose to depart, and so you took on the title of interim president. Is that
Correct.
right? Okay. And then after a period, I think 6 to 9 months, you became the president.
Correct.
Okay. And that was your first position with Phelps Dodge outside the United States, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And just because it's relevant for some of the documents that we'll get to later, if I recall correctly, you were not fluent in Spanish at that time.
No, it wasn't.
Okay. Although you told us that your Spanish improved over the course of your 5 years there.
I practiced a lot. I tried to talk to people, even if I sounded stupid. But yeah, I worked hard at it, and it was difficult.
Right.
My kids were great at it, but it was difficult for me.
Right. And given that, I assume that you relied on your staff, your team at Cerro Verde, such as Ms. Torreblanca and her colleagues, to both keep you up to date on information and explain to you the Peruvian political and legal culture. Is that
I
right?
really had 2 people. I had Julio Torreblanca and I had Jorge Benavente, who was the human resources manager. And they helped a lot, and it was good because they kind of had differences. You know, Jorge was maybe a little bit more reserved and thought differently than Julio did, and so I got a little bit of both sides of it, so it was helpful, yes.
And did you have outside sources of information to help you understand what was happening around you in Peru?
Yeah, sure. We had, there was a guy named John Yule who he'd send out a weekly email talking about what's going on in Peru, and then once a month he would invite a minister or somebody in to talk to the mining group. I had, of course, Buenaventura, one of the largest mines in Peru. When I visited Lima, I generally went and talked to Don Alberto and Jorge Benavides, and obviously they gave me some insight of what their perspective was for what was going on in Peru.
And just to make sure that we're, for context, Buenaventura was, I believe, is the largest Peruvian mining company operating in Peru.
That's
right?
correct. And they owned, at the time, they owned, I think it was around 9%. And then they later put in more equity, and I think they ended up with about 20%
Okay, so
of
the
Cerro Verde.
sorry, so the largest mining company in Peru is one of your shareholders. You're in regular contact with their chairman. That was Don Alberto that you referred to.
Yeah, great guy.
Okay. And I think you told us, one further step. Was SMCV, was Cerro Verde active in the National Mining Society?
Yeah, that's correct. We're a National Mining Society, and also we had the general managers of the large mines. We would meet, I don't know, every 2 or 3 months and have discussions about that. I was also on the board of TechSoup, which is a technical college, and the board people were generally heads of the mining properties. So I also had that communication with those.
Mm-hmm. And specific to the Mining Society, you said you were active in the Mining Society. I assume Buenaventura was as well?
Yeah, I think we're okay. I think the CEO, I think he was the head of it there for a while. Active, yes. I more or less, I would maybe go to a meeting once in a while, but I would read what they published or things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And they put on, seminars and that type of thing, and they invited me to talk a few times.
And so jumping ahead into the kind of 2004 timeframe, 2003, 2004, when the royalty law is being discussed, were you active in the Mining Society's efforts to lobby with respect to the proposals?
Well, I kept up with what they were doing. Did I go and meet with Congress or legislators? Obviously, no, I didn't. But they were very involved in during that time period. Correct.
Right.
As were the ministry and the GMs at the different properties.
Right. And just for reference, I mean, that's entirely consistent with what you told us in February, so I just want to see if we can pop up on the screen briefly your testimony from day 3 of the transcript, page 662, lines sort of 8 to 18 or so. Oh dear. The small 662 on day 3. We can even look at, if we can just zoom in on page 662, I think that'll make it a little easier for everybody to see. Sorry. Right. And this was, again, I asked you at the time, how are you getting your information? And you talk about going to Lima often, part of the Mining Society, and you refer to working, communicating with Don Alberto to stay on top of these things.
Yeah, yes, and Jorge Benavente and Julio Torreblanca and others.
Right.
Politics in Peru were a topic. Even my friends, or my kids' friends, my kids were 12, 13, 14. They would talk politics. It was much different than I was used to in the States.
Okay. All right. So let's talk about. Let's get to the heart of it. Let's talk about the concentrator plant. This is going to be a couple of questions about things before you got there, so outside of your direct personal knowledge, but things that I think you've testified about in your witness statement and that you would have learned about at the time. So, but if there's anything you don't feel comfortable answering, just say so, okay? So one of the first thing we know about the idea of a concentrator at Cerro Verde is that in 1979, Minero Peru built a pilot concentrator, right?
I believe that's the date. I'm not sure.
Okay. And that was a proof of concept. They were basically seeing if the ore and the metallurgy and the concept would work.
My understanding was a pilot plant, and later on they expanded to 3,000 tons a day.
Okay. And you mentioned in your direct examination with Mr. Ukabiala yesterday that in the 1993 to 1994 time period, in the share purchase agreement and in the privatization process for Cerro Verde, that there was discussion of developing towards a concentrator plant in that at that time frame, right?
Are you saying you talking about the pre-fees and the feasibility study? I
No,
didn't follow you.
1993, 1994.
Oh, okay. So repeat your question.
Right. So time frame is 1993
Got
and
it.
1994. We're talking about Minero Peru's privatization
Okay.
of Cerro Verde.
Okay.
And you mentioned in your discussion yesterday that the share purchase agreement at the time had a mention of the possibility of a concentrator plant.
Well, I had 4 phases. 3 of them had to do with improving the expanding leaching operation, and the 4th one essentially said build a concentrator.
Right. We can actually turn to tab 29, which is the SPA, the share purchase agreement. It's Exhibit CE4 for the record. And specifically, we're going to look at Appendix G. If you want to do the paper copy, I will say that the Appendix G is about 20 pages into the document. I think I want to say it's PDF page 18 or so. Sorry. Oh no, further. Sorry. There we go. Okay. And this discussion of phase 4, this is where I find it as an Appendix G. You have phases 1, 2, and 3 on the first page, and then phase 4 is discussed in a single paragraph on the next page. It's there you go. Right. This top paragraph where you see phase 4 in quotation marks. So this is the discussion of the concentrator plant that you're talking about here, right?
Yes, phase 4, correct.
Okay. And what we see described here is I think in this proceeding we've talked about concentrator plant. It's described as a grinding and conventional copper molybdenum flotation circuit capable of treating 28,000 tons per day of primary sulfide ore. Flotation, as I understand it, is another word for, or we can use interchangeably with concentrator. Is that right?
Well, I thought about this yesterday. There was a question about, I talked quickly yesterday, I talked about SXEW, and there's a question exactly what that is. If you want to take a few minutes, I'd be glad to do a real quick, non-technical explanation of the way you process copper. 2 ways is flotation, the other way is solvent extraction, electrowinning. And I know
Right.
you
But
probably,
this is what we're talking about here is
yeah,
flotation.
to answer your question,
Excuse me, the question again, please, Council?
But I said what we were talking about here is flotation, or the idea of the concentrator approach to processing primary sulfide.
concentrator would be called concentrator, mill, flotation circuit. Yeah, they're all the same thing.
Okay. And the alternative is leaching, or the SXEW is another terminology for
Correct.
that.
Solvent extraction, electrowinning. Correct.
Okay.
Correct, solvent, what, sir?
Solvent extraction, electrowinning. SXEW.
Okay, so what we have here is we're talking about a flotation or a concentrator, and with a capacity of 28,000 tons, correct?
That's what it says.
Right. What was the capacity of the plant that was built in 2006?
The one we built?
Yep.
208,000 tons a day.
So nearly 4 times as large.
Yeah, I mean, when you're building a concentrator size is everything, and you want to build it as much as you can, especially when you have a resource the size that Cerro Verde had. So economies of scale, economics.
Right. And what was the, I may mangle a technical term here, but what was the grinding or the crushing technology that was planned for the plant in 1993? Was it HGPR, high pressure grinding rolls?
Yeah, we looked at 2 circuits, a traditional
Sorry,
one
in
which
1993.
is 1993. No, HPGRs were not. Well, they were used in different processes, like different kinds of mineral, but for copper, no, it wasn't used.
Okay, so in 1993 they were not planning to use the same technology that you wound up using in 2006, correct?
Yeah, it's pretty much the same thing. You either have a circuit that crushes. All you're trying to do is crush this material down to sand size. So you use crusher and ball mills, or you put in the HPGR, which is a relatively new technology, but it's the same thing. The product is the same. You're trying to grind it down to sand consistency and then float the copper.
Right. Do we know from this description what technology they were planning to use in 1993?
Yeah, it says conventional copper moly flotation circuit. So it's
What kind of-
SAG mill.
I'm sorry?
It would be at the time there. I don't know. I wasn't there, but at the time in '93, the concentrators were a typical, they call semi-autogenous grinding circuit. So they have a big grinding mill, then they have ball mills followed up. So it's the same. I guess I'm not sure what you're driving at, but
Well, I think actually maybe we can. I think what I heard you just say is semi-autonomous ball crushers, or SABC.
we call it SAG mills. So semi-autonomous grinding. Whatever they called it in the feasibility study, you have it in front of you. So that's is an acronym for it. I call it a SAG mill and a ball mill.
Okay. So that's the technology you assume they were using in 1993, but in 2006 you moved on to the newer technology, the HGPR.
Well, we looked at both and all the way through feasibility study, and
But
the reason we can I answer the question? The reason we selected high pressure
I didn't
grinding.
ask you why we selected it. I just asked you which one you used. I'm sorry.
Used
just
for
trying
what?
I'm trying to be concise.
That we constructed?
Yes.
We constructed HPGRs, correct?
Right. And in paragraph 28 of your witness statement, you explain that HGPR was a relatively new technology for use in large copper processing plants, and that your implementation of it would be the largest in the world and a showcase for the Peruvian mining industry. So this was something new.
HPGRs were not new, but in a large copper circuit, they were.
Right. And it was new enough that you actually had to go to Australia to check it out.
Yeah, it was controversial whether to take a new technology and gamble on $850 million. So yes, we went to Australia. I think I mentioned in my witness statement we had a person in Phelps Dodge who was thought to be one of the experts in the world on SAG mills, the traditional way. And once he was convinced, and the reason was because the ore at Cerro Verde is hard, and so the grinding was much more efficient for power consumption. So that's the reason we went to HPGRs.
Okay, but again, just for process, I'm going to ask you to focus on the question, because my question was only, did you go to Australia to check it out? Right?
I'll try to do that.
Thank you. Okay, so taking us back to 1993, we were talking about what they were planning in 1993. Okay. Whatever they had in mind, we do know that Phelps Dodge didn't like or didn't think very much of the prospects for such a concentrator plant in 1993, right?
Phelps Dodge did not bid on the project, though.
Right. And one of the reasons they did not bid on the project, meaning they did not bid to buy Cerro Verde, is because in their assessment it was not economical to build and operate a concentrator there, correct?
That's what the report says.
Right. And that's their evaluation.
Well, I mean, it wasn't just, I think maybe you misspoke there a little bit, is they thought the project was not economic. Whether it was building a concentrator or fixing the leaching operation, they just felt like it wasn't economic. But I wasn't part of that group that evaluated it.
But you testify about that in your witness statement at paragraph 16, where you say that during the privatization in 1993, Phelps Dodge had declined to bid on SMCV, concluding in an internal evaluation that, quote, the economic returns, close quote, from expanding SMCV's operations to process the primary sulfides were, quote, unacceptably low.
Okay, but they would have looked at the leaching operation because they had both.
Well,
So,
they chose not to bid on the company Cerro Verde,
correct,
which had leaching operations in place,
and a mill.
and they assessed the future prospects of the concentrator plant, and they looked at all of that and said, I'm not bidding.
They looked at the operation and said, hey, can we make this work? And in their opinion, they said no.
Okay. So 7 years later, though, because they acquired Cyprus, it's theirs anyway.
Wow, isn't that amazing? Huh? Yes.
There had been a whole series of feasibility studies in the 1970s, 1980s, and 1990s, which I think you told us last time had sort of varying degrees of rigor, but all of which had suggested that this was not an economical project to build a concentrator.
Yeah, there were 7 of them. Some of them showed, a return of, like 14%. Some of them showed a return of like 2%. So they were over the board. But generally speaking, looking at them, it appeared to be not economic at the time, no.
Right. And you're aware that Cerro Verde entered into the stabilization agreement in February of 1998, right?
Correct.
Right. And in 1998, there was even a feasibility study that said that this was not economic, correct?
I can't remember when the last one was. Was that I think you mentioned before, the Bateman one?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, so you discussed that at paragraph 16 of your witness statement.
Yeah, I don't remember what the economics were at the time.
We can look at paragraph 16. Page 5 of your first witness statement, where you describe that a feasibility study that Bateman Engineering conducted for SMCV in 1998. Sorry, end of the, next page. Last sentence or so. Feasibility study that Bateman Engineering conducted for SMCV in 1998 identified the lack of affordable water and power as a major challenge, even for a concentrator that was 1/5 the size that we eventually built. So actually even smaller than they were thinking of in 1993, right?
Yeah, so it also says in the line, it says it was a negative net present value. That's what I said. I didn't remember what the economics were, but based on that copper price, it evidently had a negative net present value.
I'm not an economist, but that sounds bad.
I'm sorry?
I said I'm not an economist, but that sounds
Well,
bad.
it's just financial analysis. It's not that hard.
Gotcha. All right. And so when you arrive in 2000, you were actually, one of the things that you were worried about was that the government might make you build a concentrator plant, or that they were trying to insist that you had to, right?
If you're referring to that they sued us because we didn't meet the investment commitment, is that what you're referring to?
That's right.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Right. Because you did not want to build a concentrator plant at that point.
Well, I think the way we looked at it is, we invested, we met the commitment to invest, and they sued us, and I think I talked about it. I can't remember if I talked about my witness statement or not, but if you look at the language, we kind of felt like, hey, it doesn't make sense to continue trying to force us to invest in a project that wasn't economic. And so we eventually got together. The vice minister helped pull us together, and we eventually met, and they agreed that we met the commitment, and we agreed to spend another $50 million. And we also, they insisted on a phrase in there saying that we will continue to evaluate the economics of the concentrator and look for new technologies to make it economic. Right. And in hindsight, that's exactly what we did.
So, as I understand the settlement agreement, you agreed to spend another $50 million in order not to be obliged to build a concentrator plant.
No, that's not the way I look at it. I said we agreed to spend $50 million in the operation because we couldn't agree that we met the investment, and said, okay, we'll spend more money, and we'll choose what to spend that money on, and we'll continue to investigate and see if we can figure out the concentrator economics.
Right.
So that's how I would word it.
You'll choose, I'm just going to use your words here, you'll choose what to spend the money on, meaning not necessarily on a concentrator plant.
Again, we would spend it on the Cerro Verde operation. And so that if that involved spending money on, some type of analysis of the concentrator, then we would, or meant that we could expand the Cerro Verde, we would.
Okay. Well, let's talk about some of the things that were happening in the Cerro Verde project, in your first couple of years there.
Okay.
So you arrive in April of 2000, and at that point, as we've established, the operation is focused on mining and processing secondary sulfides, correct?
Correct. Leaching.
Right. And you described your mandate as being to optimize the leaching operations,
Optimize and look to see if we could expand it, lower cost.
right? And that meant that to the extent that you the project encountered primary sulfides, it had to treat them as either avoid them or treat them as waste.
That's correct.
Okay. Now, in your first witness statement, you discussed some of the steps that you took during your first few years to optimize the leaching operations. And I have just a couple of quick questions about those. So I'm going to turn us to paragraph 22 of your first witness statement. And here you explain that one of the things you did to improve the leaching operations was that you increased the cutoff grade so that each, as I understand it, each unit of ore could be processed more efficiently. You'd get more copper out of it.
Well, that's not really the reason you do it. I mean, you try to set a cutoff grade. That's the grade of copper that you're going to send to the processing plant. And so what you try to do is figure out what grade that is that essentially maximizes the net present value. And so it's a very common analysis done by mine planning guys, and what you're doing is optimizing the operation by finding the best net present value of the operation. That too may be too complicated, I don't know, but
No, okay.
But it's an evaluation. So you do a set of mine plans, and you run them all the way through the end of the mine life, and what's the net present value? It's this. Then now you raise the cutoff grade, and you run the set of mine plans. And so pretty soon, you keep raising the cutoff grade, pretty soon you have way too much waste mining, and it no longer becomes as economic as before.
So maybe to correct myself, it would have been more accurate to say that you're improving the cost effectiveness of the leaching as opposed to, I think I said, improving its efficiency. It's not its technical efficiency, it's its cost effectiveness. You're finding the optimal net present value.
Financial, yes.
Right. Now that did not increase the overall capacity of the leaching process, though. So you were not required to apply for an expansion of the beneficiation concession. Is that correct?
Well, I think I talked about two different projects. The first one was to...
I'm focused on the one in paragraph 22, the first one,
Okay.
which is just about the cutoff grade. And you say in the last sentence that because those improvements did not require you to process any more ore through the leaching facilities, but rather allowed you to process the same amount of ore more efficiently with a higher grade copper, you did not have to seek approval from MNEM to expand the capacity of the existing beneficiation concession.
If I believe correctly, if you increase the throughput, the crusher throughput more than 10%, you had to expand the concession, beneficiation concession. So we did not raise it more than 10%, the 31,000 tons.
Right, and that's what I'm referring. The crusher throughput is what I call capacity. Is that a fair terminology?
Well, I call crusher throughput because that's what the regulation said.
Right. I'm taking capacity out of your witness statement, so I want to make sure that we're on the same page. Right. Last line of paragraph 22.
To expand the capacity. Okay.
Right. If these steps that you described in paragraph 22 had expanded the capacity or the crusher throughput, your understanding is that you would have needed to apply for and obtain an expansion of the beneficiation concession. Is that right?
That's correct.
And then in the next paragraph, paragraph 23, you talk about another set of improvements that expanded one of the leaching pads and that did result in a capacity expansion from 31,000 to 39,000 metric tons a day.
Correct.
Okay. And so for that one, you did have to get an expansion of the beneficiation concession, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And for that second step, was the purpose of expanding the beneficiation concession to get to bring that new capacity under the stabilization agreement?
Well, at that time, in my mind, first of all, it was the regulation. If we increased the capacity beyond 10%, we had to expand the concession. Was there talk about did this make it stabilized? No, it never came up. It didn't make sense that okay, now we're going to process 8,000 more tons, and these tons would not be under the stability contract. I mean, it wasn't talked about, but I guess it was implied or logically you figured it was.
But the improvements from the first step that we talked about in paragraph 22, those didn't involve any expansion of the beneficiation concession either, right?
I think we already decided that it didn't increase the throughput more than 10%. So, and really, I explained there's two projects. They're kind of really related. We increased the cutoff grade, and we were probably on the limit there. And we did some more analysis and said, hey, let's just increase the crusher. We can make a lot more copper. So that's what we did. So they're not totally separate. In a sense, they were, but they were a little bit because we did the first one. It allowed us to do the second one.
And those two or combined projects had a significant impact on the copper production of the plant, right? You say that in your last sentence of paragraph 23.
Yeah, sure. It increased the copper production. I believe we were at 190 tons a day of copper, and we went to 230. So I don't know whatever percent that is. Oh, I'd say it right there. Oh, that's operating income. Okay.
So now let's move on to sort of the early stages of thinking about a concentrator project. And you explained to us in your direct examination with Mr. Capiala some of the changes in power and water availability that made that an interesting proposition. I want to talk about the pre-feasibility study. So as I understand it, you and your colleagues, was it both Phelps Dodge and Cerro Verde, or mostly the Cerro Verde team that prepared the pre-feasibility study in 2002?
It was done internally with mostly us at Cerro Verde. We had help from Phelps Dodge, Jim Vanderbeek, who was the local expert on milling, concentrating. He helped us on the design, or help figure out the cost for the mill. Right. So most of it was Cerro Verde employees.
Okay, and if we think of Phelps Dodge and Cerro Verde sort of together, the pre-feasibility study is done in-house, and then if you go on to a feasibility study, you turn to an outside consultant like Fluor. Is that right?
That is correct.
Okay, so if you get a positive readout from the pre-feasibility study, then you go hire the outside consultant.
Exactly correct.
Okay, and that pre-feasibility study, as I understand it from when we talked in February, defines the scope of the feasibility study. You're in essence saying, we looked at this project, we think this is really interesting, we think it's worth checking the feasibility. So Fluor, please go do a more detailed or a more in-depth analysis of this project.
Yeah, I think I explained as the purpose of pre-feasibility study is first to see whether it's economic to go to feasibility study, which is a lot more expensive and time consuming. The second thing is define the scope, because you don't want engineers that you're paying on time and materials to be spending a lot of money on things they should not be. It's not in their scope. And then thirdly, identify what you need to do additional due diligence on. So that's the three primary purposes of a pre-feasibility study, and I'm starting to talk too fast, so I will try to slow down.
One question, just since you mentioned it. You said that the feasibility study is a lot more expensive and time-consuming. Do you recall on an order of magnitude, the cost of the feasibility study that was done in 2004? Yeah,
in 2004, the pre-fees was, I'm thinking somewhere around, depends on what you include in the cost, $300,000 or $400,000, and the feasibility study was about $5 million, is what I kind of remember.
Okay, that is a big.
So it's significantly different.
Right.
I mean, the accuracy of a pre-feasibility study is generally plus or minus 30%. The accuracy of a feasibility study, which is also called a bankable feasibility study, is plus or minus 15%. So that's why it's more expensive.
Sure. And since the pre-feasibility study is important...
Sorry, excuse me.
Oh, sorry.
Because the transcript is probably not that clear. So you say in 2004 the feasibility study was around, what, 400,000?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
Yeah, I mean, I'm reading from the transcript. You say in 2004 the cost of the pre-feasibility study was around $400,000?
I don't remember exactly. I'd say 300,000 to 400,000. It depends on whether you included the exploration drilling, if you want to include that in the cost of the feasibility study. But I'm speaking in generalities. It's somewhere around that neighborhood.
And the feasibility study about 5 million.
Yeah, about 5. Today it'd probably be 10, 12 million.
Okay, thanks. Apologies.
No, thank you. So given the purpose that you've described, or the role that you've described for the pre-feasibility study, I assume you want those expensive consultants to have all of the information in the pre-feasibility study.
Yeah, it's important that they have the information that's related to their scope. When we went to Phelps Dodge in general, most companies do, when you go to a feasibility study, you generally assign, in our case, about 8 to 10 people of our experts, experts in crushing, experts in milling, electrical instrumentation. We assign them to a project team, and that project team is led by a project leader. And so their role is to keep the engineering company on task, make sure they follow their scope of work. So anything done in the pre-feasibility study related to their scope of work, sure. But again, like I said, pre-feasibility studies accuracies plus or minus 30%. So some of the information was important. Like what we thought the size of the mill should be. Florida needed to know that. Some of the early stuff we did, they're going to do more work and they're going to define that.
Okay. And we established when we talked in February that you had no reason to and did not recall withholding any part of the pre-feasibility study from Fluor. Do you
Yeah, I
recall that?
think. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry, my question was, do you recall that?
Yes, I think what I said was that anything related that was important for them related to their scope of work. I don't know if I use the word scope of work, and maybe you can pull it out on the screen, but anything related to what they were assigned to do, yeah, we would have shared it with them.
Well, let's look at what you did say, and then I'm going to ask about the qualification that I see you introducing now that you didn't introduce.
Well, that I wouldn't say I had qualification, but go ahead.
Okay. So if we look at day 2 of the transcript of the Cerro Verde hearing, page 655, starting at line 12. And we're going to read that through to page 656, line 12. Starting at line 12. There we go. And let's just read through that together. So I asked you if Fluor, or I believe at that point we were also talking about some other consultants dealing with tailings dam and permitting, would have had access to the pre-feasibility study analysis as well. There would have been no reason to keep it from them. And you said there would be no reason to keep it if they needed to look at it.
That's exactly what I tried to say just now. If they need to look at it, if it's in their scope of work.
Mm-hmm. And just to finish the thought, were there any parts of the my next question was, were there any parts of the pre-feasibility study that you would not have shared with those entities? And you said, no, not that I can think of, no. And then we had a further exchange about that at page 771, lines 1 to 6. And again, I asked you, do you recall excising or removing portions of the pre-feasibility study or its annexes before showing them to Fluor? Do you wish to change that testimony?
I'm not changing the testimony, no, but I think I need to clarify because I think you're kind of misrepresenting what I'm talking about. When you asked that question, what through my mind was, if we had, for example, if we had metallurgical testing that showed the ore was 3 times as hard as what the rest of them did, would we hide that from Fluor? No. I mean, we would not hide anything from Fluor. And the point I made, and I think I made it in the redirect, I think that's the term, but in the redirect is that, first of all, Terry Lindy had the day-to-day interaction with Fluor. The pre-feasibility study, I was pretty much in charge of everything. When it goes to feasibility study, I'm in charge of my area, and that was the environmental permitting, any type of social, any type of legal things. Terry Lindy was in charge of Fluor, so he'd have the day-to-day things. So Terry Lindy would be the one that had the interaction, and he would share that information with Fluor. We would not hide something from Fluor, but again, these guys are on a contract of time and materials, so that means they have to stay on scope. And that's what I meant earlier when I said if they needed to look at it. Mm-hmm. And I think in the indirect there, did we share confidential, privileged information? Of course not. We wouldn't share that with Fluor. We wouldn't share it with anybody else. That was internal to Phelps Dodge and Cerro Verde. So I think that's where you're getting at here, and I think I clarified that in my indirect.
And if we look at the pre-feasibility study itself, which is
The pre-feas?
The pre-feas
Okay.
itself, yes. It was going to be in tab 8 of the binder, but I realized that what's there is an excerpt. So we need to actually look at the full exhibit, which is not, I apologize, printed in the binders, but it is exhibit CE 928. I think this is going to be okay for you because, as I understand, you're mostly using the screen. But if you need to see a hard copy, let us know and we'll try to find one. So we've got...
Okay, no.
Yeah. So I want to look in particular at the executive summary. And that starts on page 1, which is PDF page 18. Okay. And then one of the things that we're talking about is if we move to page 2, is it your testimony that this is what the pre-feasibility study looked like when it was handed to Fluor?
I have no idea. Like I said, excuse me, Terry Lindy would be the person that had the interaction with Fluor, and again, he would give him information that was relative to their scope of work. Mm-hmm. So whether that was given to Fluor, I cannot answer that.
Do you?
I did not.
So you did not?
I did not hand the pre-feasibility to Fluor. Again, that would be handled by Terry Lindy, and again, mm-hmm. he would be. They're very careful in making sure these engineering companies stick to their scope of work, and so he would have done that.
Okay,
so I don't know if I answered your question or not.
One of the things that we've talked about, and we will talk about some more, is the fact that the feasibility study by Fluor assumes that the stabilization will extend to the concentrator plant.
The feasibility study that Fluor helped put together, I mean, it's still Phelps Dodge and Cerro Verde's feasibility study. They're the main engineers, but the one that we put together, yes.
Right. The one that we put together.
We being Cerro Verde, Phelps Dodge, with the assistance of Fluor and other engineering contractors.
The 2004 feasibility study.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah,
So that
I mean, I just trying to clarify, it's not Fluor's feasibility study, it's ours.
Okay.
I mean, Fluor helped us in the engineering. Cerro Verde did a lot of work, Phelps Dodge did a lot of work, so it's Phelps Dodge's feasibility study, it's not Fluor's.
Okay. And that feasibility study assumed that the stabilization extended to the concentrator plant.
Correct.
The 2002 pre-feasibility study assumed that the stabilization extended to the concentrator plant as well, correct?
I believe the pre-fees, we were unsure about the reinvestment of profits and how you would repatriate those profits back, and so we decided to show that as a sensitivity until we could do due diligence during the feasibility study.
Well, I want to distinguish between the profit reinvestment and the application of the stabilization to the concentrator plant going forward.
Okay, all right. You said stability contract, so I'd assume you were talking about both.
Okay.
So I guess maybe you need to repeat the question.
Sure. So did the 2002 pre-feasibility study assume that stabilization extended to the concentrator plant itself going forward?
And in the could you define the stabilization? Does that not include the reinvestment of profits or not?
So the profit reinvestment question is, can we take profits that the company is currently making from the leaching
Yeah, I know
plant,
what it is.
and
I'm asking the
use
question.
those to build the concentrator plant. That's one question. The second question is, does the stabilization agreement apply to the concentrator plant going forward so that, for example, its tax rates are stabilized?
Okay, yes.
Okay, so distinguishing those two
Got it.
questions, are both, which or both were assumed in the 2002 pre-feasibility study?
From what I remember, I think it says it. Well, maybe it's redacted. I don't know. But what I remember is that again, you want me to separate the two, correct?
Please.
Okay. The reinvestment of profits was shown as a sensitivity because we didn't fully understand how we could bring the profits back to repatriate the profits back to the parent company. So we said, hey, let's show it as a sensitivity, and then during feasibility, where we do more due diligence, we'll figure that out how to do that. Now the second one, did it assume the tax rate that was with the stabilized tax regime? Yes.
Okay. And then that same assumption, as I understand it, was included in the feasibility study.
In the feasibility study, we figured that with clarity from the MIM that we how to repatriate the funds, so they both were shown in the feasibility study. Correct.
Okay. So as to the second question, the application of the stabilization agreement, which seems to have been redacted out of this document, is it your testimony that Fluor came up with that assumption on their own?
Can you repeat what was redacted? I guess.
We don't know.
Oh,
Is
okay.
Is the first
So
point.
you're assuming what is in there, and you're asking me to assume what was in there?
Right. So let's assume that what's redacted, because in addition to the executive summary, I should say that we see from the appendices that there's a legal opinion that's been removed, and that we've not received the appendix about the stabilization law. So we're assuming, as best we can guess, that what's here is the legal analysis of the stabilization agreement.
Okay, if that's what you're assuming, it's redacted, so I would also assume that's privileged information. So yeah.
Right. So I'm trying to figure out how it is that in 2002, Fluor can come to a conclusion about the application of the
Wait.
stabilization
This is the
agreement.
pre-feasibility study. Good.
Pardon me. I misspoke, and I'm going too fast.
Okay, this is the pre-feasibility. Florida
You're right.
not involved in the pre-feasibility study.
Yes.
I'm sorry, I don't have a question, Council.
Right. I will repeat and correct my question. I'm trying to figure out how in 2004, without seeing this legal analysis, since you say that you think it was redacted, Fluor came to the conclusion, or came to the assumption, that the stabilization agreement applied to the concentrator plant. Because the suggestion is that they didn't get this legal analysis. It was redacted this way.
Okay, what I'm looking at here is a pre-feasibility study.
Right.
Okay, now
you're
could
saying
you
that-
ask that again so I maybe understand? I shouldn't be looking at this. You're talking about the feasibility study.
All right.
I
Step by
guess I
step.
don't follow.
2002 analysis of the stabilization agreement is, we assume, redacted, not given to Fluor. 2004, Fluor, not having received this information, makes an assumption about the application of the stabilization agreement.
I don't know that I would word it that way. You know, the Certiverde and Phelps Dodge, we did our due diligence, and we felt that we had confirmation that the new concentrator would be stabilized. So the decision was made to include it in the feasibility study. You know, Fluor is an engineering company. You know, we pay them money to go help design this concentrator, but it's our feasibility study. It's not Fluor's.
Okay. Well, actually, while we're here, and because we have been talking about the profit reinvestment program, I want to take a look at, in this same document, move on to pages 16 and 17 of the executive summary. And in the PDF, that's pages 35 and 36. And here we find a non-redacted discussion of the stabilization agreement. And this first, take the time to read it if you need.
No, I'm pretty familiar with it. Go
Okay,
ahead.
so these first paragraphs just seem to describe the stabilization agreement, or the stabilization agreements, I should say, in plural. And then the discussion that follows on the next page is all about the profit reinvestment program. And if we look at the first paragraph on the top of page 17, it's discussing the profit reinvestment program. And it's talking about the analysis of how SMCV's existing profits from the leaching operations can be used to, I'll summarize, pay for the new concentrator plant in a tax-advantaged way. I'll leave it at that, unless we need to go in more detail.
Well, I think that it's an incentive by the government to reinvest in your mining operation, so that's what it's for.
Right. And this profit reinvestment program, this option, if we see at the third paragraph, sort of the third full paragraph on page 17, indicates that the availability of that benefit has a significant effect on the economics of the new project, right? It has a material impact on the NPV. Do you recall that?
Well, I see it right there, correct.
Right. And you remember that,
Oh, sure.
that dynamic. Okay. That, though, as we said, is about the profit reinvestment benefit, right? That's different from the question of stabilizing the tax, royalties, whatever else regime of the concentrator plant going forward.
They both had a significant effect on the economics.
But I don't see any discussion here of the economic impact of anything other than the profit reinvestment program.
Okay.
And this is the executive summary of the stabilization agreement and its relevance to this project. Am I missing anything? Do I
don't
see
know.
anything?
I mean, but what is the question? It talks about we did not include this in the economics, and so we made a statement there saying that it could have a significant effect on the economics, and that's what it says.
Okay.
So
To be clear, the profit reinvestment.
yeah, right,
have
because we did not include it in the economics.
Okay. All right. So this is the pre-feasibility study. I'm going to move on to the feasibility study, which is in May of 2004. Completed in May of 2004. But I want to actually ask you about paragraph 26 of your first witness statement, because there was a phrasing here that I thought was interesting. And that is that you convinced Phelps Dodge to hire Fluor to do the feasibility study. Why did they take convincing?
I ultimately convinced Phelps Dodge to hire Fluor. Well, Phelps Dodge we did pre-feasibility study, and, when we did the pre-feasibility study, Cerro Verde wasn't on the radar screen to have some major expansion. It was actually El Abra in Chile. And so we did the pre-feasibility, and I think we surprised them. They go, God, do we want to invest that much more, money in Peru and everything else? And so that was what I meant by convince them, and not necessarily hire Fluor, but to convince them to do a feasibility study. And that would have been better wording than Fluor, but that's who we ended up picking. Was that the confusion?
I wasn't taking that as any sort of condemnation of Fluor.
Oh, okay.
I was just more interested in the fact that it took some work to get them to move on to the feasibility study.
Oh, yeah. I mean, went several meetings and talked about it. And I said, we got this opportunity here. We can make this into a major project, so a major mine. And so, yeah, I mean, I had a lot of discussions with him. And of course, they're, like I mentioned before, they're somewhat of a conservative company. And sometimes they play the devil advocate. Well, why do you want to do this? Would you invest $850 million? That type of thing. And so that's where the word convince comes from.
And I mean, I think that's consistent with also how you describe the process of then actually moving on, of course, after the feasibility study to the actual decision to proceed with the project. You again use that word convinced.
Yeah, the biggest debate, I think they were on board proceeding, but the biggest debate at that time was really, do we build a 50,000 ton? At that time, we hadn't decided on HPGRs, but do we build a 50,000 ton a day concentrator, or do we build a 100,000 ton a day concentrator? So that was the biggest debate really with Phelps Dodge. I think the results of the feasibility study, they were convinced that, hey, this is a good project and we should do it. but they didn't know if they wanted to spend that much more money, and ultimately they went out for equity funding and made it happen.
Right. Let's see, I just want. Right. Just to make sure that we're on the same page. So, if we look at your February testimony, day 3, page 648. We had sort of a similar discussion about the process of getting Phelps Dodge on board, starting at line 14 of page 648. And my question was, we have the feasibility study, and you have, at least you have Fluor's opinion that it's feasible to proceed with the concentrator project, and then you respond that you had Phelps Dodge, Serra Verde, and Fluor's opinion. That was your point about this being your feasibility study that showed economics, and you just needed to convince Phelps Dodge to agree to build the project.
Okay,
So that sounds consistent
that's
with what
kind
you
of
just
what I
told me.
said. Yeah.
Sorry, can I answer your question again, please?
I said that
She
sounds
didn't have-
consistent, and then you answered.
Okay.
I'm still not get a question, counsel, it's too much overlap on it.
Sorry. I said that sounds consistent with what you just explained.
Correct.
Okay. And back to your point about Phelps Dodge being sort of conservative, I think that also echoes with the discussion that we had in February about, I think it came up in the context of explaining why your predecessor had left. I think the phrase.
Yeah, a little bit. It was more a culture thing, difference culture between Cyprus and I think maybe let me just touch on a little bit. The predecessor left after I got there 3 months. We worked together for, I don't know, like 15 years in Phelps Dodge, and we were actually friends, played golf and that type of thing. And he left because he liked the culture of Cyprus. And Cyprus had another guy that we used to work with, Jeff Clevenger, who was the number 2 guy in charge. And it was just a different culture. I mean, there was more, let's go out and figure these things out, and let's go have fun and do it. And that was the culture. That's what attracted him to Cyprus. When PD bought him, he says, hey, I don't think I can handle this. I'm going to go.
And I think the phrase you used when we were discussing this in February, just for the sake of the transcript, it's page 606, lines 15 to 18, was old-fashioned. We don't need to go look at it now. Does that sound right?
Yeah, I said that, and I said, a better word is conservative.
Okay, fair.
And you
fair
said fair enough then.
Yep. All right. Okay, so you've persuaded, we're in May of 2004, or you've persuaded Phelps Dodge to proceed with the feasibility study. Fluor Canada has completed it in May of 2004 and decided that it would be feasible to proceed with a 108,000 ton
Metric ton.
metric
tons.
ton, apologies, capacity concentrator plant. And that's, well, never mind that. All right. So, to circle back, when we talked about it, we talked about the fact that in the 2004 stabilization agreement, 2004 feasibility study, both the May version and then in your witness statement, you also explained that in the update later in the year in September 2004, both of those assumed that the concentrator plant would be stabilized, right?
Correct.
Okay. And that assumption principally plays in through the financial analysis, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And that was a financial model prepared by Phelps Dodge.
Correct, yes.
Okay. So Fluor doesn't claim to have audited that or to separately have investigated its tax treatment or accounting standards, right?
I don't remember how they mentioned it in the feasibility study, but it was a financial model that Phelps Dodge uses. It's been audited by Price Waterhouse. whether Fleur went there. I think, seem I to remember they said something about they checked to make sure the numbers were calculating correctly or something along those lines, but I'd have to refer to that document, exactly what they said.
Sure. Well, we can take a quick look at it
Okay.
just for the benefit of all involved. So that's at tab 9. It's Exhibit CE 20, which is the 2004 feasibility study, and page 14-1, which is page 3 in the excerpt that's in the binder. It's actually page 153 in the full PDF. And here it describes that the financial analysis is an internal proprietary Phelps Dodge economic model, and Fluor specifies, throws in a caveat, that auditing from the standpoint of taxation or accounting is not within Fluor's scope of services. You said in February that PwC audited the financial model, but they didn't state a view on the stabilization agreement.
You said a lot there.
Sorry,
Can you ask
I'll
the
break that into
question?
pieces.
Sorry.
Sure. Okay, so looking at this document, this is Fluor's, well, this is the feasibility study description of the model in question, right? So we were saying the financial analysis model is developed by Phelps Dodge. That's up in the first paragraph. First line of the first paragraph. Then the first line of the second paragraph says that it is a proprietary internal Phelps Dodge product that's been used for project evaluation since 2001. Fluor has reviewed the model and is satisfied about its mathematical functions and its cash flow, but that auditing from the standpoint of taxation is not within Fluor's scope of services. And it's been performance tested by PwC. And I think we agreed in February that there's no discussion here of PwC or Fluor having said anything about the stabilization agreement. Does that sound familiar to you?
That Fluor and Price Waterhouse did not say anything about the stabilization?
Well, let's take PwC first.
Oh, okay.
Okay. I think for efficiency's sake, I'll just throw the transcript reference in there because I don't think we need to spend time.
I think I said I have no idea.
Okay,
So is that what you want me to say? Okay. I have no idea whether Price Waterhouse did anything.
Okay.
It's out of my scope.
That's fair. And the transcript reference I'll have in mind, I'll put in just for the record, is day 3, page 652, lines 15 to 22. All right, so this 2004 period, though, May to September of 2004, is also when you've told us that there was uncertainty and concern about the scope of the stabilization agreement internally at Phelps Dodge, and as we understand also at Sumitomo, right?
Are you talking about, excuse me, are you talking about the political climate in 2003 and 4? Is that what you're talking about?
Well, we know that in 2004, the company decided that you needed to seek additional confirmation or assurances.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Right? Why
Okay.
was that?
Why was it? That was a question.
Briefly, please.
It's a hard question to do brief. In 2003 and 4, I mean, here we were doing the feasibility study. We were trying to convince, my word, Phelps Dodge to invest in Peru. In 2003 and 4, it was a very difficult political climate. Congress was, first of all, commodity prices starting to rise. Congress was talking about, hey, these mining companies are making a ton of money. We need to put in royalties. And there was even one congressman, I didn't even have to refresh my memory, Jose D. Canseco. He was a very outspoken congressman. And he made statements as, I don't care if these mining companies have a stability contract. They need to pay us more money. And so obviously that made us, the miners in Peru, nervous. It made even the administration, the ministers, nervous because they knew that if the government would not cancel the stability contracts, that would freeze future investments in Peru. And so everybody was nervous. And so it even made Phelps Dodge and us nervous. And so we said, okay, we need to make sure we have some type of written confirmation that if we build this concentrator, it will be stabilized. So that was as quick as I can do.
I appreciate that. Thank you. I mentioned, and I should set the stage, Sumitomo, and I think you also set the stage for it when you referenced Phelps Dodge getting an equity investment. As I understand it, when Phelps Dodge decided to seriously consider proceeding with the concentrator plant, they decided that to help finance that or to help get the capital for that, that they would get equity participation from Sumitomo. Is that?
Yeah, essentially sold 40% of Cerro Verde.
And so that's a stage at which you need to persuade Sumitomo to bring that capital in, right?
You know, as I think you mentioned, or I mentioned someplace, you know, the meetings I had with Sumitomo, you refreshed my memory during the last thing, is you had a couple of meetings, and my meetings with Sumitomo dealt with, okay, what's going on at the site, and then technically what does the concentrator look like? So the financing part, discussion with Sumitomo, I was not involved in. Right,
but if Sumitomo isn't comfortable bringing their money to the table and buying that 40%, there's no concentrator project here.
I can't answer that either. Whether Phelps Dodge would look for additional funding someplace else or would go to bank funding, you know, I can't answer that question. I would certainly try to persuade them to figure out something else. And whether they would have not, you know, it's hypothetical, I guess.
Okay. Well, I mean, in paragraph 29 of your first witness statement, you're talking about the process of persuading Phelps Dodge, and you said that the president of Phelps Dodge was skeptical about such a substantial investment, but that you decided to take advantage of the economies of scale with a larger capacity after securing further equity partnership from Sumitomo Metal Mining and from Benaventura. I had understood that made those equity investments sort of a but-for condition or a necessity for proceeding with the large plant.
Well, I think it's a little bit more than that. You know, that we had two cases. We had at the time it was 50,000 or 100,000 cases, and you know the 50. I think again, Tim was concerned about the large capacity. He was trying to go for the smaller one because it wasn't putting so much money in Peru. And then I think, again, I wasn't involved in how they figured out the equity, but I think he became convinced. He says, hey, we'll go out and get equity. But I do remember the conversation with him and others. I said, if you're going to Sumitomo to get equity, it's only fair that you go to our other partners, Buenaventura, and offer them the same thing. And whether they had thought of that or not, I don't know, but I certainly made that comment to Tim and others.
But those you're right, there are two. Those equity contributions are what convinces Phelps Dodge to go with the bigger plant, right?
I believe so. I mean, I think that was the hurdle that to build a big plant was really they didn't want to put that much money of their own money, Phelps Dodge's money, into Peru.
Okay.
So that was my understanding.
Right. And so at some level, that means that you've got to not only reassure Phelps Dodge, but you've also got to reassure Sumitomo that they should feel comfortable that this project is going to be fine.
Well, the relationship between Phelps Dodge and Sumitomo is a long relationship. They own 20% of Morenci, which is one of the largest mines in the world, and they also invested in Candelaria in Chile when Phelps Dodge first built it. So I think Sumitomo is pretty comfortable with Phelps Dodge. But the meetings I've had with Sumitomo, they usually ask 1,000 questions. They're very technical and very detailed in their analysis.
But we've heard testimony, and I think is in your witness statement as well, that prior to this time period, you already believed that the stabilization agreement already covered the concentrator project if you were to proceed with it. Is that right?
Prior to what time frame? Where were we at?
Let's put ourselves. So let's talk about 2002 and 2003.
Okay.
So as I understand it, in that time window, well, and I'm trying to get a handle on it as well, because I think we've heard different explanations of how stabilization is achieved. So we've heard some testimony that the company thinks that everything was already stabilized under the stabilization agreement the way it was written from day one. Nothing more was needed. Was that your understanding?
Well, I think I explained it yesterday. To me, the stabilization is pretty simple. You stabilize the concession, and in the concession, the mining concession and the beneficiation concession. As I explained the reasons why, I think I had like 5 or 6 of them yesterday, and the first one, it's a porphyry deposit. And porphyry deposits are processed either through leaching or a concentrator or both.
Right. We've
So,
got those
okay.
5 reasons on the record from yesterday.
So did I not answer the question then?
So you said you stabilized the concession, and the concession is a mining concession and a beneficiation concession. So your understanding of the stabilization agreement is if I get a concession and the concession stabilized, everything that happens in the concession is stabilized. Is that right?
Yes. I said what you're stabilizing is the mining concession, which contains the porphyry deposit, and the beneficiation concession, which covers the processings.
Right. What if on that same property, Cerro Verde had decided to build a smelter? Would the smelter's profits be stabilized?
So last time you asked me to build a rod mill, now it's a smelter,
I thought
huh?
I'd try something else.
Okay. And again, I kind of answered it last time,
Very briefly, we would just object to the witness being asked to speculate about what would have happened if Cerro Verde had built other types of infrastructure. It's purely hypothetical.
I'm asking him to explain the company's understanding of how the stabilization agreement worked. He was the president of the company. He has an understanding of how that stabilization agreement works. I want to test the boundaries of what that means. So if I understand correctly, you can answer the question.
Okay, and I explained to you last time, and it's hard for me to get my handle around a smelter or a rod mill or anything else. I think a better example would be as if we decided to leach the concentrate, and that's actually something we did. We looked at it. During that time, there was a process that Phelps Dodge was working on, is to actually leach the concentrate. So you have a concentrator. Your final product is a concentrate, like it is today, and then we take that concentrate and leach it and turn it into copper cathode. Now, to me, that's more relative to your question. It makes more engineering type sense, and I say, yeah, there's no question.
And would that require additional capital investments, additional technology?
It would have been done at the same time, but yes, it would have cost more than $850 million.
Right. Would it have expanded the capacity?
No, it'd be the same. Because you have concentrate that has X amount of pounds of copper, and now you're going to leach that and make those X pounds of copper.
Mm-hmm. So essentially anything you want to add to the plant, to the beneficiation concession and the mining operations, that in your view is going to be stabilized because the deposit's stabilized. Is that
Well, I guess I would word it differently. The mining concession was stabilized. So the mining that we do inside the concession is stabilized. The beneficiation concession, anything we do in my mind, anything we do in a processing plant to produce a saleable product is stabilized. So, yes, that's
okay?
Answers your question.
And in your view, that was the case with no further steps or permissions or approvals needed from the government. That was how the stabilization agreement worked as it was signed.
Well, no, that's not right. You had, if you're going to change the beneficiation concession, if you're going to change that, you have to apply for, like we did, expansion of the beneficiation concession. That's what we did. So I guess maybe I misunderstood your question. You just don't simply say, "Hey, we're building a concentrator, boom, we're stabilized." No, there's a process.
In order to expand the beneficiation concession, because you're expanding the capacity, you have to get approval to expand the beneficiation concession. But as I understand your theory, that getting the expansion of the beneficiation concession, as you did in 2001, to your theory, that doesn't affect whether it's stabilized or not.
No, again, what I said is the government has a process, and that formal process, and legally allowed, and if you're going to change, if you want to change, like we did for the concentrator, the 2 steps that we looked at was amending the existing concession, the stability contract, or expand it. and what we decided was to expand it. So that was the process we had to follow. It is not automatic, unless I'm misunderstanding what your question is.
Well, let me ask a different question.
Okay.
If you had, if there had been no stabilization agreement in place, and you had decided to build a concentrator plant, you would have had to seek expansion of the beneficiation concession, correct?
If you had no stability contract in
We're
place, that
taking
means you have no
stabilization-
concession, I guess. So I don't follow what you're saying. Sorry.
Well, you have a concession. You have a concession entirely separate from
Oh, okay.
the existence of the
Okay.
stabilization agreement.
But we had no,
Sorry, I said you have a concession.
okay.
The existence of a concession does not depend on or cause to come into existence a stabilization agreement. So I'm taking the stabilization agreement off the table. There is no stabilization agreement. You just have a mining concession and a beneficiation concession.
Okay.
Okay?
So, for example, like in this case, if in 2014, the stability contract is gone because it expired. So
Right.
now, something
now-
like that. Okay.
Right. So now you want to build a concentrator plant. You're going to have to get a beneficiation concession expansion, correct?
I don't know. We had no stability contract, and so I guess if you're going to build a concentrator, you would enter into. I guess you'd enter into a new stability contract to stabilize the new investment you're making. But if I'm following you correctly, if you don't have a stability contract, you build a new concentrator. I would imagine you would go to the government and say, hey, I'm going to spend $850 million and I want a stability contract.
Right. But the requirement to extend the beneficiation concession or not is separate from that discussion. You have a beneficiation concession that says you can process 39,000 metric tons. You want to process 150. You're going to need to get an expansion of the beneficiation concession.
Exactly what we did, yes.
Okay. To sort of play out the logic further, you said at the time you thought either we were going to amend the stabilization agreement or we're going to expand the beneficiation concession. Is it your testimony that if you had gotten the amendment, you would not have needed to expand the beneficiation concession?
The amendment was to have a new concession with a concentrator. And then the next step is for them to take that new concession and put it into your existing beneficiation.
Why couldn't you just
So-
amend the contract to change the definition?
I'm sorry?
All right. I'm not going to take it up with you because you're not the lawyer who's coming up with the idea, as far as I know. But
Okay. Well, all I'm saying is my understanding for amendment, I think I discussed it yesterday, I believe, but was anyway. So the first step is a two-step process. The first step is to create a new beneficiation concession that has a concentrator in it, and then the next step is to get the MIM to put that new beneficiation concession into your existing concession, and then it becomes stabilized. That's my understanding.
yeah, as a lawyer, there's lots of ways to amend a contract. So
Okay.
But that's not your purview.
I'm just a mean little technical guy.
All right, but so as I understand it, well, again, I guess I'm still confused. In 2002 or 2003, did you think you needed to take an additional step like expanding the beneficiation concession or amending the stabilization agreement?
Okay, so I'm back in 2003, and your question is, did I think about all this stuff?
Right, because those are extra steps.
No, they're not. I mean, when we went from 31 to 39, we had to expand the concession. So when we were going from 39 to add a concentrator in there, we had to expand the concession. I think it became more highlighted because of the political climate. I mean, that's what made everybody, including me, nervous because, some of these Congress guys are saying, hey, we're not going to honor the stability contract. So that really made it more pronounced. But the step was the same. I mean, you still had to expand the concession.
I think we'll let the lawyers argue about the consequence of expanding the concession. But let's talk about this political climate that you've referred to. And again, you're getting your information about the political climate from the mining society in which you're a participant, from your partners like Buenaventura, from other mining companies that you're talking to. This is all coming to you. You're getting this information in Arequipa and you're passing it back to Phelps Dodge, correct?
Yeah, I got it from a lot of sources. I mean, it hit the news. I mean, I can read about it in the paper. So, yeah, it was a very controversial time. And I'm sure they read it, too.
Before, I lied. I said we were going into 2004, but let's talk about May or June of 2003.
2003.
So May or June of 2003, the pre-feasibility study is completed. By this point, possibly the feasibility study is underway, or not until after, a little later?
Boy, you're testing my dates. You know, we've talked so many dates. We completed the pre-fees, I don't know, 2002-03. I kind of remember the years, whether I don't remember the months for sure.
December 2002 on the face of the document.
What is it?
December of 2002.
Oh, okay. So, yeah. And so then the next step was to decide whether we're going to go to a feasibility study. So what was your question again? Sorry.
I was just getting us oriented.
Okay.
My question was the feasibility study underway? But I don't think I actually need to know the answer to that. So if you don't know off the top of your head, that's fine. We talked about how one of the economically important questions in the pre-feasibility study was the question of the profit reinvestment benefit.
Correct.
Okay. And you explained in your first witness statement that in May or June of 2003, you went to talk to the Director General of Mining, Ms. Chapuis, about the availability of the profit reinvestment benefit.
I believe so. And I think there was some correspondence going on, too,
Right.
to try to understand it.
Sure. Just to orient you, this is paragraph 33 in the first witness statement. Right, so you say around May or June of 2003, Julia Torreblanca, then Director of Legal Affairs, and I met with Maria Chapuis, MINEM's Director General of Mining, because her office held primary responsibility for supervising mining stability and mineral concessions under the General Mining Law. She was your main contact. And then you go on and say, at that meeting, Ms. Chapuis confirmed that because of the stability agreement, SMCV was eligible to use the profit reinvestment benefit to construct the concentrator, so long as you complied with all the procedural requirements. I'm assuming that means things like construction permits and environmental permits and things like that.
Yeah, it means whatever the process was to do this, yes.
Okay. So you had, at this point, you have assurances directly from the Director General of the Mining Ministry, Director General of Mining at MINEM, that you're fine. That economically important question that you had in the pre-feasibility study, she's told you you're all set. Follow the process, follow the procedure, you're good.
On the reinvestment of profits?
Right.
Yes.
Right.
You know, again, we needed clarity. We knew we were eligible for it. We just need clarity. And the concern was, how do you repatriate the funds back? And so we went through, okay, if I remember right, I think Julia had sent some emails or letters to them to say, you know, hey, help us out on this process, and how do you do this? And I think that was the clarity around it. But, yeah, we believed it. We had it. We just didn't know how to repatriate funds.
Well, okay, because I mean, you refer to, emails or letters from Julia Torreblanca, I assume. I think those are described in the next few sentences of this paragraph that are something that's sent after this meeting. Right? It says, when we had not received the document by July, and this was a meeting you said happened in May or June, then we wrote to Ms. Chapuis. So are you saying that there were letters before the meeting and letters after the meeting? Or
I
were
don't.
you referring to these letters after the meeting?
I assume I'm referring to this thing here. You know, we were always pretty. We wanted things like yesterday, and the minister or the MEM doesn't operate that way, and so we were always kind of pushing them to, hey, we asked you a question, why don't you answer it? And so that's what I was referring to. We followed up.
But you got an answer at the meeting. She told you you're fine.
Well,
Follow
she
the
said
process.
comply with applicable procedure requirements, and that's what we're trying to get clarity what the procedural requirements were. Is what is my memory, but what is
Well,
your
let's-
specific question? I'll try to answer it.
Well, I'm trying to understand why those letters were sent, right? Because you have a meeting.
What-
Ms.
I-
Chapuis tells
I-
you everything's good. Follow the process,
Yeah.
and then you say afterwards we hadn't heard from them, so we write twice to the office to inquire whether and how to take advantage of the program.
Okay. And your question.
What's in your view the purpose of the letters?
Well, I guess maybe I need to look at the letters, and then maybe
Okay.
I can help.
All right, sure. So we can take a look at the first one. This is, tab 10, exhibit CE 394. It is titled petition number 1418719, July 3, 2003. Now, this is a letter that's in Spanish and signed by Ms. Torreblanca.
Could you make it a little bit larger, please?
Yes, and what you're looking at, to be clear, is the translation that's in the record for this arbitration. But the original is in Spanish, and it's sent from Ms. Torreblanca to MEM. I don't know if you would have read a translation at the time, or would you have just discussed the concept with Ms. Torreblanca of that she was going to write a letter and what she was going to ask about?
Yeah, more than likely, we discussed it. Yeah, we wouldn't waste the time to translate.
Okay.
She would translate for me.
Right. And this letter is asking for clarification about whether reinvesting profits from the leaching plant into the primary sulfides project, the concentrator, would be approved, right?
Yeah, can you get back where?
So again,
What are you
just
reading?
Move us up and down wherever you like.
No, I'm trying to move to where you were reading. What paragraph was that?
It's a one-page letter, but
Okay.
so sorry, not there yet. Right. So the prior paragraph
Yeah.
says,
Okay.
as you're well aware, we're conducting a feasibility study. The decision whether or not to implement the project is directly related to this reinvestment option. Based on the assessments conducted, we think that we meet all the requirements and will qualify to receive approval of this program. But we have a question. And the question comes in the next paragraph. It says, given that our stability agreement refers to the leaching project rather than the Cerro Verde project as a whole, which would also include this new primary sulfides project, we request clarification that the investment program using non-distributed profits, the profit reinvestment plan, would be approved. So we want clarification in advance that we can get this profit reinvestment plan, even though our stabilization agreement just refers to the leaching project. Is that your understanding of what the question was?
Well, might as well jump to it. I mean, to me, it was about the elephant in the room. Cyprus, they did a feasibility study in '96. They called it the leaching project. They did a stability contract in '98. They called it the leaching project. And some people, particularly in Phelps Dodge, says, "Well, how can you build a concentrator? It's called the stabilized leaching project." And I said, it's a name. That's all it is. The stability is not defined by a process, and the things I talked about yesterday, it's not defined by a process, and also the leaching project is a name they filled out. Why they picked it, I don't know, but I guess I was thinking about, the feasibility study in '96 was called that. So I'm assuming that's why they called it in the stability contract, they called it the leaching. So this was just to make sure nobody got confused by that title. That's my memory of why this letter was sent.
Okay.
Whether it's worded the best, I don't know. I didn't write it, but it was about the elephant in the room.
Okay. And then there was a second letter 5 days later, which is Exhibit CE 395. It's in the binder at tab 11. Again, we're looking at the translation here, but it's Ms. Torreblanca to Ms. Chapuis. This one is 2 pages. I would summarize it as saying that there's a number of more detailed questions about how the profit reinvestment plan works. And there's a request to clarify this and confirm the scope of the profit reinvestment plan. And so, for example, it says in the part that we were just highlighting here, for example, it says in the part that we're just highlighting here on the screen, we are also unclear as to whether the deadline, wrong text. So the final request in the letter is, we would appreciate if you would confirm our understanding of all the features that we've just specified. So it's asked a series of detailed questions about how the profit reinvestment plan works, and is asking for confirmation. So why was the second letter necessary?
I don't know. Can you go up to I'd have to read it.
Sure.
I mean, I've looked at it before in the documents that council gave me, but what does it say the reason is? Does it say?
Sorry.
For this reason,
Yes. So let's look at the paragraph that says, among the provisions.
Okay.
So in the middle it says, as you well know, we're in the process of evaluating various technical, economic, and legal aspects around this possible expansion of our operational activities. It's essential that we know with absolute certainty the scope and characteristics of the profit reinvestment system. And for this reason, we would appreciate if you would take the time to confirm certain aspects of the most important features of this program in light of the stabilized tax system. And I don't think it matters sort of what the specific questions are from this point forward. You can read them, and it's only a 2-page letter, so I have no. But in the interest of time, I think it's clear that this is saying, this is really important to us. Please confirm that we've got it right, that we understand this correctly. And you and Ms. Torreblanca, I assume, felt that it was necessary to get this confirmation, right?
Well, we're doing our due diligence. I mean, that's what you do when you do, like as I mentioned before, you do the pre-feasibility study, and during the feasibility study, and you do your due diligence. And this was a due diligence that we identified that we clearly needed to understand exactly the procedure that MIM required for us for this benefit. So that's my understanding of the letter, that to make sure we get it right, because it's important.
Okay. Madam President, I think this might be a good time for a break. If it's convenient.
Okay, then we meet again in 15 minutes.
15? Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Please proceed.
Thank you, Madam President. All right, Mr. Davenport, I'm cursed by the usual problem, which is if you give a lawyer a chance to think another minute or two, they'll think of another question. So,
Shouldn't have taken a break, huh?
but in this case, it's one last very simple factual question to finish off our discussion of the interchange with Ms. Chapuis about the profit reinvestment program. You had a meeting with her. She said everything's fine. You sent letters saying we'd like your confirmation, we'd like clarification. Her office answered those letters, correct?
Yes, I believe so. If you want to show me the letter, I can.
No,
Oh,
I mean,
okay.
you say so in your witness statement, so I
Oh, okay,
assume you would
okay.
confirm that as well.
Okay, good.
Sorry.
Please, you're overlapping.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Finish your question, please. I don't have a whole question.
Right. I just pointed out that you say as much in your witness statement, and I'll say that that's paragraph 34 of your first witness statement for the record, and so I assume you would confirm that now
Yes.
as well. Okay, thank you. All right, so I promised we would go to the political context in 2003, 2004, when there's the discussion of the royalties law. As I understand it, as I think you described it, and as I understand, there were two possible problems with what was being discussed in connection with the royalty law. One was, what is this going to mean for our new project, the concentrator project? But there was also a question of what is this political discussion going to mean for our existing operations, right? Are they going to, in essence, tear up our stabilization agreement and apply the royalty law to our existing operations anyway?
That's not quite how I explained it. You know, to me, they're the same thing. The existing operation, we put the new concentrator into a beneficiation concession, so it was the same concern for the same thing. They weren't separate.
Okay.
Because they were talking about, hey, at least early on they were talking about, we don't care if they have a stability contract. We want money from these mining companies. So it was the same.
Right. So this was a concern for you whether or not you proceeded with the stabilization, with the concentrator project,
Oh, yeah,
right?
for sure.
Okay. Setting aside the what happens with the concentrator project, though, what was the end result of the royalty law for all of Cerro Verde's existing operations?
The end result being when it was passed.
Exactly.
Yeah, and the end result being financially.
Yes.
Oh well, they did not. They respected the stability contract. Is that
Okay.
your question?
Yes.
All right.
So all of that political fulmination from Congressman Diaz-Canseco does not result in them tearing up all the stabilization agreements.
Thank goodness, huh?
And as to all of your existing operations, apart from the concentrator plant, they continued to be protected by the stabilization agreement, even after the royalty law is put into place.
As far as I know, when I was there, yes.
Okay. Now, you explained that that there came a time when you or Phelps Dodge or Sumitomo or some combination thereof thought it was important to get some written confirmation of the application of the stabilization agreement to the concentrator project, correct?
Yeah, it was like I mentioned before, the political conflict going on. It just we needed something more written confirmation, and so yes.
Okay. Now, if we turn to your witness statement at paragraph 39 in your first witness statement. You described there around mid-2004, Ms. Chapuis, who we determine is the Director General of Mining at MNM, confirmed to my team that the stability agreement covered SMCV's mining unit comprising its mining concession and sole beneficiation concession, and explained that once the concentrator would be included in the existing beneficiation concession, it would benefit from the stabilization guarantees. So you say that I guess in this case, your team heard from Ms. Chapuis that you were covered.
Well, I think, as I explained yesterday, we first were looking to try to amend it, and then went through that process, and then at some point in time, in discussions with MIM, Ms. Chaprice's office, they're the ones that said, hey, all you really need to do, I think I explained it yesterday, all you really need to do is expand the concession. And we'd done that before, we knew the process, and so that was in my mind, and I think in Phelps Dodge's mind, that was a written confirmation.
Right. But this meeting in mid-2004, again, it says confirmed to my team, so I assume this is not a meeting that you participate in directly.
Yeah, I try to remember. I don't know whether I did or not. I would participate in a lot of meetings. It would either be Julia Torreblanca or Julia Torreblanca and myself.
Okay. In your second witness statement, and we discussed this in February, however, you talk about a different interaction with Ms. Chapuis that I assume precedes this, that was not in your first witness statement. And that was your interaction with Ms. Chapuis in June 2004. In your second witness statement, this is paragraph 11, where it says that your colleagues and you held meetings with various MNM officials, including Ms. Chapuis, and to your surprise, they did not initially confirm that the stability agreement would apply to the concentrator. Did you think it was not relevant to include the full record of Ms. Chapuis's positions in your testimony?
I'm sorry, I don't understand the question, the full record, what are you talking about?
Well, in your first witness statement, you say, my team met with Ms. Chapuis and she assured us everything was fine.
Yeah.
And in your second witness statement, you say, well, but then in June, we met with her and she did not say it was fine.
Right.
At least not right away.
So we had this conversation before. You're penalizing me for not putting it in the first one. And, what I remember in the second one from talking with the council is it was important that I responded to some of your questions from my first witness statement. So I believe that was in response to some of your questions, I believe, but I don't know.
So
in hindsight, like I told you before, I did 2 witness statements, and to me, together they're 1 witness statement. And so whether I put it in the first one or the second one, why I did that, I'm not sure I really remember or know.
Well, I think it's important in one way, which is that you say in 2003 we met with Ms. Chapuis. She told us that we were fine under the profit reinvestment program. We took comfort from that. We thought we were all set. In 2004 we meet with her again. Now she's not sure about the extent of the stabilization benefit. Then we hear from her, it's going to be okay, do the beneficiation expansion. So that's sort of an up and a down and an up. The way you first tell the story is everything's fine all the time. And I think it is relevant to tell the trajectory.
Well, let me try to explain. I believe, now that I think about it a little bit, that my presentation, past, present, and future, had several variations, versions of it. And once we were told about the Tantaya thing, I included that in that version. So I'm assuming that that's what triggered this, to include this in more detail so the tribunal would understand what we were doing. So it wasn't up and down. I mean, when we talked to them, they talked about Tantaya, and as I mentioned before, Tantaya, I talked to the general manager. I knew him. Tantaya was totally different, and once they understood the difference between what we were doing and what Tantaya was doing, they agreed that what we were doing was totally different.
So when you say in paragraph 39 of your first witness statement that you had confidence in what Ms. Chapuis was telling you, that was after she had gotten over her hesitation that you didn't tell us about in the first witness statement.
Didn't tell you about it. Okay?
Is that, okay, so timing-wise, we're right. You have confidence after she first hesitates.
I think the second witness statement just went into more detail,
Okay.
expanded on the discussions.
All right. And you were aware at the time that Ms. Chapuis's view was not a uniform view in the Ministry of Mines, correct?
You're talking about Vice Minister Polo.
I am.
Okay.
Right. So you're aware that Vice Minister Polo did not agree with Ms. Chapuis's understanding. Is that right?
I wouldn't word it that way. Vice, might as well get into it. Vice Minister Polo, he's a mining guy like I was, or am, and we had great conversations. He was supportive of the project. When I talked about it was important that this project was stabilized, he was skeptical. And Vice Minister Polo, he said, he never really gave me a technical reason or a legal reason. He was just skeptical, and I think it was in my first testimony is I didn't really understand why. He was positive. Of course, he reports to the minister, and the minister was Andrea was very positive about it. But in the private meetings I had, or the meetings with Cesar just by himself, he was skeptical. And I remember him even saying one time is that you guys bought this for $39 million, and you guys are making a ton of money. You don't need this. And I go, yeah, that's kind of unfair, because Cyprus was the only bidder, and they took the risk. And during time when Peru was not as stable as it is today, and they took the risk and made this a real mine. And so I guess it's one of those things, Cesar, again, we got along, we were fine, we were both mining guys, but on this, we did not agree.
And did you report the Vice Minister's, to use your phrase, doubts back to Phelps Dodge and Sumitomo?
Probably when they came down and visited. I don't remember when. I'm sure I mentioned that the Vice Minister had skepticism about this, but I don't remember when I did it or how I did it, but probably when they visited sometime.
Okay. And
part of it too was, it's not his decision. That decision is really done by the director, general director of mining. It was done by that office. Cesar, Vice Minister Polo, and the minister, they're political appointees. The bureaucrats really handle the process of going through the process and getting things done. So it wasn't his decision as far as I was concerned. So it wasn't a concern to me.
Is it your understanding that the General Directorate of Mining is outside of the hierarchy of the Vice Minister and the Minister?
No. They go up to what my point was is that those guys are both politically appointed positions. The bureaucrats handle the process, and my understanding is the bureaucrats, call them bureaucrats, I don't know if that's the right word, but the technical people, they handle the actual processing of the concession and the stability contract. So whether the Vice Minister didn't agree, okay, that was important, but I knew the Minister and of Mining, the Minister of Agriculture, the Finance Minister who I had meetings with, they were all very supportive of this. And the presentations I gave, I always mentioned, the stability of this concentrator was very important to this decision by Phelps Dodge.
Vice Minister Polo, you've described him as a political appointee. Are you aware that he was Vice Minister under multiple ministers?
I think he wasn't the Vice Minister when I got there. That was Hubert Montes, I believe his name was. And then, I'm not sure why he left, but he left, and then Polo was the Vice Minister, I believe, after him. And I can't remember if he was still the Vice Minister when I left in 2005 or not.
Well, we can obviously explore that with Vice Minister Polo, but his was not a
I'd
short
like to say
career
hello
in the
to him, but I
ministry.
probably can't, can I?
I said his was not a short career
Oh,
in the
no,
mining.
not at all. He's a very technical, very, knowledgeable mining guy. I believe at the time the Key Andrea, the Minister of Mining and Energy, I believe, I know he wasn't a mining engineer like Polo was. I think he was an economist, but also I think his background was more on the energy side of things. So, yeah, he was critical for that ministry because he was the mining guy.
Right, and he was the author of the law that we're all arguing about.
I don't know.
Okay.
I
And-
know he was part of the Minero Peru in the privatization
Right.
part of things. So,
And you do know that he was Ms. Chapuis's boss.
yeah, that's a hierarchy, I understand. And his boss was Minister Key Andrea.
All right, so let's go into seeking additional assurances, written assurances. And I understand from both your testimony and Ms. Torreblanca's that it was important to Phelps Dodge and to Sumitomo to get something in writing, right?
Yeah, and it was really, as I mentioned, it was really driven by the political climate in Peru. As I mentioned, I felt like all along, for various reasons, that the constitution would be stabilized, but the political stuff going on in Congress made everybody nervous and want more and more clarification or certainty.
And we discussed in February that this wasn't just get something, it was get 100% confirmation in writing, right?
February of,
When we talked in February at the
Oh.
prior hearing.
I'm sorry, say that again then?
We discussed in February that this wasn't just, show me a law or show me a piece of paper. We want 100% confirmation in writing.
I don't quite remember that question in February, so maybe need to refresh my memory.
Okay.
I remember the 100% came from Sumitomo notes. I
Okay.
don't know if that's what you're referring to.
Well, let's talk about how you tried to get that confirmation. So we have on the record, in your second witness statement at paragraph 12, just to set the stage, you say that SMCV Cerro Verde held further meetings with MNEM officials in July and August of 2004, where PowerPoint presentations were delivered. And we will talk about those PowerPoint presentations. So, again, we held further meetings. I assume you personally participated in some of those meetings.
Yeah, I would have participated in some of those meetings with them.
Do you think you probably participated in most or all of them?
I don't know, probably half, but I'm not sure.
Okay.
I was, involved in a lot of meetings, particularly in working on the environmental permitting. So I had meetings with them too.
Okay. You've already referred a few times to a PowerPoint presentation titled Past, Present, Future, which is on the record as Exhibit CE 450. And the version that we have on the record is dated July 8, 2004, and it's at tab 15 in the binder.
July 8th, 2004? Okay.
Well, so the document on its face says July 2004. There is I remember chasing this down at one point, how the date July 8, 2004 came into play, but let's just call it July 2004. No need to fuss
Yeah,
over it.
and like I said, that was my presentation. I put it together myself, and there was versions of it, as I mentioned earlier. Once we had the Tintaya question put in, I think I added that later on just so I get clarity around it. But yeah, there are several versions of it.
So, if I understand what you just said, this is, in essence, there was sort of a base deck of slides that you prepared, and then it got tweaked over time.
Yeah, exactly.
But if we see something in the record that looks like this, sorry, can we show the tab? Because I think visually it's striking. So if we see something that looks like this with the past, present, future logo title, it's likely to be some variation of your PowerPoint, right?
Yeah, you'd said July 8th. It says July.
I know.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Because July would have been, so I didn't have to change the date every time I had a meeting. I just said July, and so they wouldn't know that.
For some reason, it's in the index as July 8, but it doesn't matter for our
okay,
purposes. We'll
okay.
call it July.
Okay, cool.
Okay, so we have this presentation, and I want us to look at slide 18. So this is a presentation that you're using in meetings with the ministry.
Correct. And whoever else would listen.
Okay. And slide 18 talks about the feasibility analysis of primary sulfides, which I'm going to take as the concentrator project. And it says that this assumes, hold on, important major assumptions. So the last sort of major bullet, important major assumptions, number one, the profit reinvestment benefit. That was what you discussed with Ms. Chapuis in 2003. And then important or major assumption number two, that the primary sulfides, call it the concentrator project, is stabilized under the current contract. I'm going to assume that the current contract, by which you mean is the 1998 stabilization agreement.
Yeah,
I think that's right.
Pretty much. I mean, it was stabilized under the existing stability contract and concessions.
Right. So these are two important, major, but separate assumptions, right?
Well, they're two different activities, yes.
Okay. And then this is echoed on slide 21, which is describing the investment decision. I think of this as the go, no-go. And so you say the feasibility study's been completed. I'm not sure what marginal project is.
Marginal means, it didn't have a return of 50%. It had a return of, I believe the last number was, somewhere around 15 or 16%, depending on how you did it. So you'd say marginal, I guess. And some of this was, I was giving this to the ministry, and it wasn't a slam dunk. Mm-hmm. And so this, it was difficult decision for Phelps Dodge because there was a ton of money, and it's very important that we were convinced that the concentrator would be stabilized.
Right. And so were you trying to signal to the ministry that everything was kind of teetering on what you were going to ask them for?
No, I don't think so. I mean, it's, like I said, 14-15%, it's not a slam dunk. Phelps Dodge was trying to decide whether they wanted to put $850 million into Peru. So, there's some tough decisions there. So that's what the marginal project means.
Right, and then you sort of echo that by saying it's a difficult decision, it's high risk.
Yeah, it's $850 million in Peru, which is clearly political risk.
Okay, and then you say you signal that the decision's going to come in October 2004, and then you identify contingencies. Are those contingencies? Are you explaining those contingencies are things that are going to make this project go or not go?
The decision would be contingent on approval of the EIA. Obviously, you can't have a project if you don't have approval of the EIA. And actually, we submitted an EIA. We submitted it the first time, and they had questions on it, and they actually denied it, and which was a total surprise to us. And so, and of course, we quickly answered the questions and resubmitted and got it approved. So I think in July that was still out there, so I wanted to flag the approval of the EIA, certainly with respect to the stability agreement in force, and then final economic indicators.
Okay. And the risk analysis in the last bullet, does that also relate to the stability agreement, or is that something else?
It's risk of the project. So there's risk on, stability would be one of them. There'd be risk on, can you really do 108,000 tons a day? Can you really get a 90% recovery? So that's the risk factors. When you do a project, you identify those associated risks.
Okay. And then if we go forward, we get into some more detail on this. And page 41 of the presentation. Page 45, wrong page. This is your conclusions. This is your wrapping up. Here's what we need. And the third bullet point in particular I'm going to point to says that Cerro Verde requires the certainty that only a stability agreement is able to give in order to carry out this investment of more than $800 million. And then you say that the requested addendum provides this certainty. has solid legal and contractual report in accordance with decisions previously made by MEM. So you're proposing to amend the stabilization agreement.
Yeah, I think I talked to you about yesterday. I think originally we were going down the path of amend, and I'll explain it to you, but I think I will because you said I don't explain it like a lawyer. But I understood it being a two-step process, and again, my concern was schedule. When you decide to build a concentrator, schedule drives everything. As soon as you can get that thing built and start making a profit, so schedule is very important for that. So I think I lost my train of thought. But
It's okay. I think
guess it
we're clear
happens,
there.
huh?
You said your main concern was timing. So,
yeah.
and the point of that
Oh,
addendum was to get us to make sure that the stability agreement expressly says this applies to the concentrator plant, right?
I remember my train of thought. So we were initially looking at the addendum. We saw it was a two-step process. It was our legal right to do it. I was just a little nervous about the schedule. And then, as I think I explained yesterday, later on in the discussions with Ms. Chapri's office, it came up as you don't need to do an addendum because it required the ministry probably to do more work, but a two-step process, and all you need to do is expand the beneficiation concession, and so that was the path we took. But initially, we were looking at an addendum.
One difficulty I have is that this was July of 2004. You described this sort of transition to switching off of the addendum or the amendment to the contract and going instead for expanding the beneficiation concession as your path forward. Sorry, haven't asked the question yet.
Okay.
But in August of 2004, the Phelps Dodge board is still being told about modifying the agreement. Does that sound consistent with
No,
that
not
switch
really.
that you've told us about?
Not really.
All right. Well, let's look at that.
What my timetable really is in, I believe it was like June 2004. We started going down the path of addendum, and then sometime in either late July or in early August, we said, "Hey, let's do the expansion of the beneficiation." That's my recollection of the timing of it. The Phelps Dodge board, I guess I'd have to see what
Sure.
document you're referring
Well,
to.
so let's actually look at that. So,
Okay.
Exhibit RE 324 is at tab 18 of the binder, is an email from
Yeah.
Dennis Bartlett to Timothy Snyder and Red Conger and Lowell Shonk that attaches a presentation for the board, a draft presentation for the board about the Cerro Verde project. So what we see here is the cover email, and then what I want to talk about is the draft presentation that's attached to it. First of all, how would Dennis Bartlett have gotten information about the Cerro Verde project to present to the board?
Excuse me. So you either get the technical stuff probably from Terry Lindy, that was the manager of managed Fleur. If there was legal, social type things, they probably would get it from me.
Right.
And he came down in a meeting, we discussed it, and he drew his own conclusions.
So would you have been involved in the preparation of this PowerPoint, or would you have been giving the information to him and he makes his own PowerPoints?
Yeah, I probably did a few slides. I'd have to look at the whole thing. If it had cross sections in it, I probably provided that. A presentation of the board was, it's a big deal.
I
And,
would assume so.
you see in August they started doing it, and the board meeting was in October. So I know there was a lot of variations of this, of these slides, but yeah, some would come from me, some from Terry Lindy, and then Dennis would do his own.
Okay. So we can flip through this, but I'm headed for slide 5. But if you just want to sort of see what comes before that to get us there. So you got some country facts about Peru,
Now, that'd been my slide there.
the description of the project, sort of a summary of the economics that seem to be projected. That's slide 3. Next one, and here we have the timeline. I'm this looks a little more detailed than what Dennis would prepare himself. Is this something that would have come from you?
It probably would have came out of the Fleur, because it's probably a spreadsheet that Fleur put together in the feasibility study of the timeline.
Right. I'm sorry, I should have actually, I didn't do what I should have, which is to set the stage. What is Dennis Bartlett's position?
At this time, he was, I believe I reported to Red Conger at this time, so he was my previous boss, but he reported directly to Tim Snyder, so I don't remember what his title was, but he reported directly to Tim Snyder and I think involved in the projects.
And Tim Snyder
High level.
Tim Snyder is the president of Phelps Dodge?
Tim Snyder is, I don't remember his title, I think he was president of the mining company. He's the number 2 guy in Phelps Dodge.
Okay. And Dennis reports directly to him?
Yeah, Dennis was like a senior VP of some sort.
Okay. So on this slide 5, we see that there is it's called Cerro Verde Sulfide Project Timeline, and one of the things that is planned to be accomplished in Q3 of 2004, if we go down the 2004 line, so it's actually one of the first white bars down, is modify the stability agreement. That's under other activities. Do you see that?
See it.
So that sounds like that's still the amend the agreement plan.
Well, I don't know. Can you go back up to where the key milestones are? I think Council showed some of these slides, and they were continually updated. And some of them even said, needs to be updated, that type of thing. And so they would update some slides, and they wouldn't update other slides. So if this was done at this timeline, at this date, then I would say this one isn't. This slide hasn't been updated to the final version. But there should be, if you go up, there should be one that says milestones. And I don't know how.
I don't think so, because I think we showed you all the slides on the way here. So we got the first Republic of Peru, then cover page, Republic of Peru, project description, cover page, Republic of Peru, description of the project, economic results, timeline.
And that's it?
And I'm happy to flip through like 2 or 3 after this to see if there's more detail.
Yeah, why don't you do that?
Okay.
Well, there is a stability contract. Well, see, the Ministry of Mines has proposed a process to include the sulfide plant in the facility covered by the existing stability agreement.
So you
that's
take that as
expansion.
that's the beneficiation
yeah, so I
expansion
guess
plan?
all I can.
Sorry.
Too
Our fault.
fast and too much overlapping, please. It's
Okay.
impossible to interpret or write.
Right.
Thank you.
Okay, so this maybe more accurately reflects, you're saying that this looks to you like the new plan to expand the beneficiation concession instead.
Yeah, I guess what I'm saying is this is a big presentation. A lot of people were feeding it. I'm sure a lot of these slides were updated as they went, but I'm pretty confident that whatever they showed the board, it included the most updated information, which would have been expansion of the beneficiation concession.
Okay, so the discrepancy between the two, we'll just assume it's just the earlier one didn't get updated.
Yeah, and I think there'd be no question about that.
Okay. But it's still clear that at this point, somebody thinks something has to happen to the stability agreement in order for the concentrator to be stabilized.
Well, of course, you had to expand the beneficiation concession.
Okay.
And then, the process after that is the construction permit and build it and then inspect the construction, the final product.
One moment, if you'll forgive me just a second. Sorry, confusion resolved. All right.
May I just interrupt? Just on this slide here. When I read the Mines Ministry has proposed a process to include sulfide plant in the facility covered by the existing stability agreement, this will shield the sulfide operation from the royalty. Did you include precisely this wording into the slide?
What was the last part?
Did you include precisely this wording into the slide?
can't say. If they're talking about the stability agreement, I certainly had input on it. Whether that was my specific words, if it wasn't, it could have been. Because, I mean, I would agree with what they said. And this really is in reference to, we were looking down the path of the addendum, and then the meeting with Mr. Priest's office, they said, well, you don't need to do an addendum. All you have to do is expand the concession. So that's what this is in reference to. Whether those are my precise words, I don't know, but they would have been. I would have said the same thing.
So when it states the Mines Ministry has proposed this beneficiation concession extension, then you mean Ms. Chapuis has proposed and suggested on your request to get confirmation that the concentrator is stabilized to do this process here.
What I'm saying by those words, and they could be my words, but what I said was we were going down the route of doing the amendment to the stability contract, and we were having discussions with her office, and then through those discussions, it was suggested by them. He said, you don't really have to do an addendum. All you need to do is expand the concession. So whether the word propose is the correct word or not, they're saying this is a better process, not easier process, but process that we had done before. So proposed, is that the question? Did they propose it? Yeah, they told us that you ought to do the expansion of the beneficiation concession rather than addendum.
And the second bullet point, this will shield the sulfide operation from the royalty. Was this your interpretation of the proposal, that this was the effect of the proposal, or was also the second bullet point, this will shield the sulfide operation from the royalty expressly stated by the Mines Ministry?
How I would answer that question is that we expand the concession and we put the new concentrator in the beneficiation concession. And then now what is, and again, as I've tried to explain, is that what's stabilized is the concessions, the mining concession and the beneficiation concession. So once we put the concentrator into the beneficiation concession, then it's stabilized and it protects us from a royalty.
I know that this is a position in this arbitration, and this is the assumption of today. I want to understand what the assumptions at the time were and what were just in your head and what has been proposed and expressed. So my question again was the second bullet point, that this extension of the beneficiation concession will shield the sulfide operation from the royalty, something that was expressed to you by the Mines Ministry expressly, directly?
In my mind, it was, again, I'll try to answer the question better, is that once the concentrator is in the process to put the concentrator into the beneficiation, was expand the beneficiation. You go through the paperwork. You get a construction permit. Then after you build it, they come back and do that. That process would shield you because it's in your concession, which is stabilized.
But Mr. Davenport,
Okay,
you said earlier, I am a technical guy, huh? I'm not
good.
a lawyer. So, for
thought
me,
you said you
it's
were.
not important how you interpret it
Okay.
today and believe that it is. From a legal perspective, this is what we need to decide. For me, it's really decisive what has been said, what have you said, what have you heard.
Mm-hmm.
And so again, my question, have you heard someone expressly saying, okay, and now this will shield the sulfide operation from the royalty? Have you heard that?
Yeah, to me it was implied, yes.
Have you heard that? Implied is something different. Who said it to you?
Well, in the meetings we had with Ms. Chaprice, what we were trying to do is written confirmation. And there was, in our minds, there was two ways to do that. It was the addendum and the expansion of the concession. Just like the expansion is just like we did before in the 31,000 and 39,000. So if you do that, Now the concession is implied, or the concession is stabilized. And so if your concentrator is in the concession, then it's stabilized. And I'm not sure I'm answering your question because I kind of said the same thing, but
I mean, here it's about a lot of money, huh? If this meant that this will shield the sulfide operation from the royalty, we are talking now here in 2004 about a lot of money. So if this was made express to you, this must have been like the victory, and was a great report maybe to, and I felt Dodge, we succeeded, now we are safe. And is this what this presentation is about?
this is making the point is that we are going to, again, go through the process to expand the beneficiation concession. And once we do that, once it's approved, and it isn't actually fully approved until you built the concentrator, yes, it will shield us from the royalty. So yeah, when in the discussions with Minim, once they said all you gotta do is expand it, and I think I mentioned yesterday, that's kind of when the light bulb went out. That's what we did before, and we went from 31 to 39, and there's no question that that increased production was stabilized. And so to me, it was the same as putting in the concentrator. Once we put it in there, it's stabilized.
Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt, but
No,
please
it
go
was
ahead.
it was actually excellent timing, and I was clarifying something in my own head. So, the one last question I'll ask about this slide in particular is I just want to draw the contrast between the bullet right above stability agreement, which says that Cerro Verde's existing stability agreement will shield the leaching operation from royalty. So it seems that at this moment, and then in the second bullet below, you say, well, we've got to do this additional thing to shield the concentrator from royalty. So your understanding at this time is if we get the beneficiation concession expanded, then the concentrator will be shielded. But until that point, only the leaching project is shielded.
I think the reference about the leaching was in reference really to political, the political activities going on. And I see that it shows that they approved a sliding scale for the royalties, so they got off the idea of trying to cancel the stability contracts. And so I think it was just the royalty for the existing operation. We didn't have to pay. It was protected. And then yes, once we do the expansion of the beneficiation concession, then it also would be.
Right. Because the bullet only mentioned, the first bullet that we've got highlighted in yellow only mentions the leaching project.
Yeah, it was in reference to the mineral royalty that the Congress just passed. Because I think people had to get clarity. Okay, they didn't cancel our stability contract, so we're not paying royalties.
Right. So having switched gears to the plan to expand the beneficiation concession, Cerro Verde made that request on August 27, 2004. When they made that request, did it say we're doing this in order to expand the stabilization agreement?
The request that
To expand
the paperwork that required by Minim.
The paperwork to expand the beneficiation concession.
I don't remember. If you'd show it me, maybe I could. But
Sorry, I'm getting multiple Post-its from multiple directions
I give you
with
one?
contradictory suggestions. So,
okay, well, don't do either one.
yeah, that would be the alternative. Would you like to say this?
Yeah.
So, okay, I'm going to process my notes here. I think we're actually going to move on to what you suggested, which is let's take a quick look at the request to expand the beneficiation concession itself.
Okay.
And that is at tab 20, which is Exhibit CE 457. Its official title is Petition Number 1487019. It's dated August 27, 2004. Again, the original, not surprisingly, is in Spanish. This is a translation. And the first paragraph identifies who's asking, and the second paragraph in the middle says, I am requesting the modification of the beneficiation concession to expand its installed capacity from 39,000 metric tons today to 147, and the modification of the area of the beneficiation concession by 1,200 some odd hectares, both of which are required to pursue the scheduled exploitation of our operations. So that's the request.
Okay.
Expand our beneficiation concession, both in terms of capacity and in terms of its geographic footprint, right? It does not say, and in order to apply the stable benefits of the stabilization agreement to those new operations, does it?
No, I mean, it was probably the same wording that we used in 2001 to expand from 31 to 38. So to me, you expand the beneficiation concession, it's implied that that's required by it, and it also means it's stabilized. So we tried to follow whatever Minim said that to their process to do the expansion. So
Okay.
I mean, it was the concession that was. I know we don't agree with that, but it's the concessions that have stabilized.
Okay. All right, and Minem answered that request and granted the expansion of the beneficiation concession, correct?
Yes.
All right, so, and the concentrator, so you proceed to build the concentrator, and it's completed by, I think, first quarter of 2006, if I remember correctly.
Now, that's a 2-year construction, so
Oh, sorry, last quarter of 2006,
that
my
makes
bad.
more sense.
So, all right. Now, you, if I recall correctly, left Peru in May of 2005. So at a point where I guess the construction is underway but not yet completed.
Yeah, they tied me up and made me leave. We worked all this time to get this thing a reality, and I kind of wanted to stay for the construction, but generally they, 5 years is a long time to have an expat there, so in their mind that they needed to move us around.
Right.
So I left, yes.
I mean, I also had the sense from our conversation in February that your next post was a promotion as well.
Yeah, I mean, it was a title, I guess, promotion. I don't remember them giving me a pay raise in that sense.
Often those two things don't go together.
But, yeah, I mean, it was kind of a different area. It was going to the corporate office, which I'm not thrilled with because I'm an operator. And it was, I think initially the title was General Manager of New Projects.
Right. But all of their new projects, I mean, around the world,
Yeah,
right?
it was fun for a while until copper prices went down, and then what projects do you have? You don't have any. So corporate life was not my joy, and as you can see from my statement that I left, I don't know, 4 years after I got there.
Right. And I believe you indicated in your first witness statement that although you didn't, maybe this was from our discussion in February, so let me confirm, that you didn't have direct responsibilities or oversight responsibilities for the Cerro Verde project, but that you kind of kept an eye on it because I think you described it as your baby.
Yeah. I didn't want them to screw it up. How's that?
Okay. Let's see. Right.
But I say that jokingly. I help Dennis put together some slides sometimes. You say, hey, get a hold of Cerro Verde, have him take some pictures of the construction. So I do that type of thing. As far as direct responsibility, obviously none. I did help out on there's a completion requirement when you get loans from banks, and I was working on one at the for Phelps Dodge on the Tinky project in the Congo, and so I said, hey, why don't you do this one also, because it's a technical completion. So that's about all I was involved with at Cerro Verde.
Okay. I'm going to ask to look, if we could, at tab 22 in the binder, which is Exhibit CE 901, which is Phelps Dodge's 10K form for 2004. So it's their report filed with the SEC on March 7 of 2005, but covering the financial year 2004, which is a year where you were still in place in Arequipa, right?
Yeah.
Right. That report, if we go to, let's see, page 80 of the document, which is page 83 of the full PDF, which is page 5 of the excerpt that's in the binder, it's a discussion of the Cerro Verde project, and we will blow it up because it is small. And it's describing what's happening in Peru. Let's see if we can blow up the entire June 2004. Sorry, we're blowing up the paragraph that begins on June 24, 2004. And so this is describing the enactment of the royalty law and an amendment of the law, and pointing out that the stabilization, that there's a question about the stabilization agreement. It says, it is not clear what effect, if any effect, the new royalty law will have on operations at Cerro Verde. Now this is being said, it's being written in March 2005 about what happened in 2004, a point at which you got your beneficiation concession extended. You were proceeding with the concentrator project. You had you say you had the written assurances that you needed, but they still don't know what the royalty law is going to do to the project?
I didn't write it. You know, I'm not involved in Phelps Dodge's 10K. All I can speculate is, you know, it's just identifying political risk. You know, that statement in there, they probably do that. They probably did it for the Chile operations, because I think at the same time they were talking about royalties in Chile, or additional royalties. So I think it's just political risk, identifying it.
Would it surprise you that same kind of statement shows up in the 2005?
It wouldn't surprise me it showed up to today. You know, it's still political risk.
Okay. So when you left Peru, concentrator construction was underway, completed in the end of 2006. You're keeping an eye on your baby from afar.
Kind of.
And at what point did you hear that not all was well with the treatment of the concentrator plant?
You know, I'm not sure I did. And to be honest, I'm not sure I really did until these guys called me and said, you know, hey, would you be willing to be a witness? I really didn't keep up on what was going on with, as far as, you know, the stability. And actually, I still don't even know what was done. So, no, I did not keep up with I mean, nobody told me. And I guess, again, I was busy with other work, so no, I didn't know.
Okay, I guess then I'm a little puzzled by the last sentence of your first witness statement in paragraph 44, which says that I was surprised to learn in 2009 that the government had refused to honor the commitments we had worked so hard to obtain.
Oh, I guess I did. Learned in 2009, I was getting ready to leave. Okay, I don't remember that. It's in my statement. I guess I should have, but I really, maybe I heard there was problems there, but I don't know the details, and I still don't know the details today.
Right, because the witness statement was written in
Yeah, I know.
2021. Hang on, October of 2021.
Right.
So I guess in October of 2021 you remembered hearing in 2009, but today you don't remember hearing in 2009.
It was in my statement, so I'm surprised that I didn't remember saying that in 2009. I don't remember the specifics for sure. I still don't know them today what the specifics were, if they charged them royalties or what. Okay. But yeah, I misspoke earlier based on my statement.
I take the fair point that you don't remember today. I mean, I guess.
But it's in my statement. I should remember.
Well, and not only is it that you learned something in 2009, but it's pretty specific, It says the government refused to honor the commitments that we had worked so hard to obtain. So it's a pretty specific statement about what you learned about at that time.
Yeah. It's
Okay.
in my statement.
We're just puzzled?
Huh?
We're puzzled?
We're
Or
puzzled.
should we take that out of the statement?
No, I put it in there, so in reviewing the documents and I must have said, okay, I knew that in 2009, or I would have put it in my statement, so no, don't take it out. I had just forgotten it.
Okay. Give me just a second here. I have excellent news for you. I'm done.
All right. I'm going to make Cinco de Mayo in Arizona. Huh?
Well, I don't know. That depends on how much redirect there is, so, or how many questions there might be from the tribunal.
Okay.
So,
Well, thank you.
Thank you very much. So does claimant have questions in redirect?
Madam President, could we have just a moment to confer very briefly?
Yes.
Thank you.
Do you have questions in redirect?
Yes, just very few brief questions on redirect, Madam President. Thank you. Could we just ask to go back to that Exhibit 324, which was the draft presentation for the board in October 2004, and I believe we were looking at slide 6. Is that a bit better? And so, Randy, I just wanted to come back to this document, and so that you can clear up any ambiguity that might be remaining about your discussion of what the ministry told you about this proposed process that's described here. So could you tell us exactly what the ministry told you the effect of expanding the beneficiation concession would be?
Yeah, like I said, the process was initially to do an amendment to the stability contract. And then we were going through that process and we met with the ministry and they said, well, you don't really have to do that. All you to stabilize the concentrator, you don't really have to do that. All you have to do is expand your beneficiation concession. And that's exactly what we did in 2001. And, that increased production was stabilized.
And the ministry told you that if you expand your beneficiation concession, the concentrator would be stabilized?
Oh, yeah. I mean, just like we did in 2001.
And what was your understanding at that time as what that would mean with respect to the application of the royalty to the concentrator?
Well, it would be treated just like the leaching operation. It would be stabilized, and so there would not be, as a royalty existed at that time, would not be charged royalty. And it would have the same tax, the other benefits that a stabilized regime has.
Thank you. No further questions, Madam President.
Thank you. This respondent has some recross questions?
No, thank you, Madam President.
No. Then we may have some question. I turn to Mr. Cremades. Yes.
Good morning or good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Just one question. In these proceedings, there is a lot of hearsay about discussions, verbal with Madame Capuy, and you in your report says that you have serious doubts about Vice Minister Polo, about the whole thing. You have insisted in different occasions having a written confirmation. You haven't got any answer. You were negotiating or trying to get an addendum. You didn't get that. The impression we could draw about that is that the government didn't want to give you that request you wanted to stabilize the concentrator. Did you, and that's my question, at any moment say to the government, we are sorry, we know that this project is very important, but we will not go ahead investing if you don't give in writing confirmation about what we want to be covered by this stabilization agreement?
As I tried to explain before, that would have been best. I mean, clearly. And as I mentioned with the political climate there, we're not going to get that from Minister because he didn't have to. And I think the ministry relied on the process. And the process was either you could do an addendum, and it's not like they wouldn't give us an addendum. They just suggested, hey, you can still do an addendum if you want. They just suggested that all you need to do is expand your concession. But as far to try to specifically answer your question, I don't think it was possible in that political climate, or maybe in any climate, because these ministers would insist that you follow the process. We have the law here. Here's the process, and this process is to expand the benefit. In this case, the beneficiation concession. So that would be my response to your question. Did I answer it?
Thank you very much.
Okay, you're welcome.
Maybe some sort of a follow-up question. So when you received this assurance you were just asked about in 2004, that the concentrator was stabilized by extending the beneficiation concession and thereby exempted from royalties. How did you report this achievement, so to say, and that within Phelps Dodge? How was it communicated? Do you recall some email correspondence or whatever on this agreement and assurance that you had received at the time?
I'm trying to remember if I had a specific email. Probably, we had conversations all the time, and so I think Phelps Dodge and the people I reported to in Phelps Dodge were clearly aware that the direction we were taking was initially the amendment, and then once we said, talk with the men, they said the expansion. How I communicated that to Phelps Dodge, I don't remember. I probably either sent them an email or called them, or they were there, they knew that that's what our direction was. So I don't remember the specific. I mean, I don't remember going out and say, hey, let's go out and have a few beers. We just succeeded in this. I don't remember that part, but I remember, I'm sure I communicated in some manner with them. Hey.
So you cannot refer us to any written document, and now where, so to say, this understanding within the company was shared and celebrated?
Well, I guess the written document is, mostly, I guess, these presentations that said that we met with, we were doing the addendum, we met with Minim, and they said, you can do that, but, here's a better path to do it than expansion. Whether there was a written document, I didn't see it in the materials that I reviewed. I don't remember that, other than the presentations I made.
And did you, as a non-lawyer, did you at that time seek legal assurance from outside counsel that this oral commitment was enough to?
Well, we used outside counsel. Luis Carlos Rodrigo was my main contact there, and we were working with them to what process do we need to do to make sure the concentrator is stabilized. And so I was in discussions with them. Well, let's do an addendum. And then
if we could just interrupt very briefly,
I'm sorry.
and the witness should only answer to the extent that we believe that he should only answer to the extent he doesn't disclose.
I don't hear.
I'm sorry, we would just submit that the witness should only answer to the extent that he doesn't disclose privileged information.
So you invoke privilege. So he should not. What does he know as a technician? What he can say or not?
No, I'm sorry, Madam President. I think that your question was completely appropriate, and we just wanted to, for the witness to be aware that his answer should be limited to the question of whether he sought legal advice and not stray into what the content of that legal advice was.
Okay, then I'm fine. I just wanted to get
Sorry
confirmation
about
on
that.
that, and I think this is a proper question, right? And okay.
that was to me, because I was sometimes I talk too long. Our outside counsel was the Rodrigo firm, and certainly we work with them on all this path to confirmation that the concentrator will be stabilized.
Then let me jump back in time, my last question, and now to the time of the pre-feasibility study, 2002. Did I understand you correctly that you were, so to say, in charge of everything for the pre-feasibility study? That was your baby?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, we had some help from Phelps Dodge. We had help from the Santiago office, which is they're over South America, and their help was mainly the financial model. But other than that, we did the mine plans. The mine plans are the driver of the economics. Jim Vanderbeek, the guy that from Phelps Dodge in Phoenix, did the work on the concentrator, but we did the rest. Yes.
And we use some outside engineering companies when we needed to.
And did I understand you correctly that in the financial model you assumed that the stabilized tax regime would apply to the concentrator?
Is it the financial model for the pre-fees or the feasibility study?
For the pre-fees.
Oh, yeah, if I remember correctly, we assumed, yes, that the concentrator would be treated the same as the leaching operation. We did not, as I mentioned before, for the reinvestment of profits, we were unsure about repatriating those funds back to the states, and so we left that as a sensitivity, and until we figured that out. But yeah, it was in the economics of the pre-fees, it was assumed the concentrator would be stabilized.
And was there also an alternative calculation based on the assumption that the concentrator would not be stabilized? And I do not talk about the reinvestment of profit. I talk about the concentrator and our income.
Would there not be another, I didn't catch that word, would there not be another what?
We distinguished earlier on two things. And now one thing is the reinvestment of profit.
Mm-hmm.
And the other one, whether the concentrator, when it starts to operate, is subject to the old stabilized regime. And I want to better understand, for the second part, stabilization of the concentrator in operation. Was there an alternative calculation made, or was there only calculations in the financial model based on the assumption that the concentrator was stabilized?
So your question is, did we do sensitivity on
that
okay.
point? Yes, financially.
I'd have to look at the pre-feasibility to remember. More than likely, if it wasn't in the pre-fees, I'm sure we did it because somebody probably asked that question. But I'd have to look at the pre-feasibility document to be certain whether it was in there or not. I don't remember.
You assume that such alternative calculations were made?
Well, you do sensitivities on a lot of things. You do sensitivities on copper price. You do sensitivities on the throughput, the recovery, all those. Whether it was we did it with the stabilization, I don't remember doing it, but probably somebody asked the question, so we said, yeah, this is the effect it'll have on it.
And you said probably someone has asked the question, is this what you earlier referred to because there was this elephant in the room?
I don't know if the elephant was there at that time, or the elephant became more clear in the feasibility study. But the elephant in the room was always people, and Phelps Dodge, I think, was the first one that always said, what's called the leaching project, and I would respond, that's just a name. That's what they called the feasibility study. It doesn't mean that project, it doesn't mean anything to do about stabilization. What's stabilized are the concessions. And so the elephant in the room was, why in the heck did they call it the leaching project?
And as you are a non-lawyer, just also I think it's a proper question. And now do you recall that you obtained legal advice at the time of the pre-feasibility study on this very question that we just discussed?
Oh, sure. Yes.
And now this is the redacted part in the pre-feasibility.
I believe so. The appendix, whatever it was, G or
Okay.
H or something. Yes.
Thank you. Then you are released as a witness, Mr. Davenport. Thank you very much. We have no further questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
So probably it would be a good time for a lunch break, right?